The sun was just starting to dip behind the mountains when I realized I had made a mistake, a bad one. I had set out early that morning, eager to tackle the Black Ridge Trail, a rugged, less traveled path that promised solitude and stunning views. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with a crispness in the air that made every breath feel sharp and clean. My backpack held the essentials: water, snacks, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and a map I had glanced at but didn't study too hard. I'd hiked plenty of times before. How hard could it be? The first few miles were easy. The trail was well marked, winding through dense pine forests, the ground soft underfoot from last night's rain. Birds chirped overhead, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush told me I wasn't entirely alone. Squirrels, maybe a deer or two, nothing to worry about. But then, around noon, I reached a fork in the path. The signpost was old, the wood weathered and splintered, the letters faded. The arrow pointing left said Black Ridge Summit, the one pointing right just said Creek Trail. I hesitated. The map showed the summit trail continuing straight, but the left path looked more worn, more traveled. I went left. Big mistake. First, nothing seemed off. The trail narrowed but was still clear, cutting through thickets of brush and over small, rocky outcroppings. But after another hour, the trees grew denser, the sunlight filtering through in thin, weak beams. The air felt heavier, damper. The path started to slope downward when it should have been climbing. I stopped, pulled out my map again, and squinted at the lines. This wasn't right. I should have turned back then, but I didn't. I told myself I'd just go a little farther, see if the trail looped back around. Maybe I'd missed a marker. The ground grew uneven, roots snaking across the dirt like veins. My boots sank slightly into the damp earth with each step. The forest was too quiet now, no birds, no rustling, just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional creak of branches overhead. Then I saw it. A steep drop, sudden and unexpected, the earth just ending. The trail didn't continue, it just stopped at the edge of a ravine, the other side too far to jump. My stomach twisted. I wasn't supposed to be here. I turned around, heart pounding. The trees looked different now, unfamiliar. Had I passed that moss-covered rock before? Was that broken branch always there? My footsteps had left marks in the mud, but the light was fading fast, shadows stretching long and dark across the forest floor. I picked up my pace, following what I thought was the way back. But nothing looked right. The trees crowded in, their branches like skeletal fingers. My breath came faster, my pulse loud in my ears. I checked my phone, no signal. The flashlight in my bag was my only light now, but I didn't want to waste the batteries yet. I kept moving, forcing myself to stay calm. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl. Not close, but not far either. My blood turned to ice. I froze, listening. Another growl, deeper this time, followed by the snap of twigs. Something big, something moving toward me. A bear. I didn't see it, but I didn't need to. The sound alone was enough. My muscles locked. Run? No, running was bad. Climb a tree? Maybe, but I wasn't fast enough. Slowly, I reached for the bear spray in my side pocket, fingers trembling, then crashing through the brush. Heavy footsteps. Too fast. I turned just as it emerged from the trees. Not a bear, a mountain lion. Its eyes locked onto mine, yellow and unblinking. His body was lean, powerful, shoulders low as it stalked forward. My throat closed up. Everything in me screamed to run, but I knew that would trigger its instinct to chase. I raised my arms slowly, making myself look bigger. "Get back!" I whispered, voice shaking. The lion paused, ears twitching. It bared its teeth, a hiss escaping its throat. My fingers tightened around the bear spray. Then it lunged. I jerked back, spraying blindly. The cougar snarled, twisting away as the chemicals hit its face. It recoiled, shaking its head, claws raking the dirt. I didn't wait, I ran. Branches whipped at my arms, my legs burning as I crashed through the undergrowth. I didn't look back, couldn't. My lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. Not until my foot caught on a root and I went down hard, pain shooting up my knee. I scrambled up, expecting claws to rip into me any second. But nothing came. Silence. I stayed still, listening. No growls, no footsteps, just the wind in the trees. Had it given up? Or was it waiting? I didn't know, but I couldn't stay here. Limping, I forced myself forward, every shadow making my heart skip. The forest seemed endless, the darkness swallowing everything. I checked my watch, hours had passed. I was exhausted, my mouth dry, my hands shaking. Then, through the trees, a flicker of light. A campfire. I nearly cried in relief. I stumbled toward it, my legs weak. A small clearing opened up, a lone tent set up near the fire. A man sat beside it, his back to me. I opened my mouth to call out, then stopped. Something was wrong. The man wasn't moving at all. His posture was stiff, unnatural. The firelight cast long, jagged shadows around him. And then I saw it, the dark stain on the ground near his feet. Blood. My stomach dropped. I backed away slowly, my breath shallow. The forest behind me was a wall of black, but I'd rather take my chances there than stay here. Then a twig snapped behind me. I spun around. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, silhouetted against the moonlight. Tall, silent, watching me. I didn't wait to see who or what it was. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. Not until my legs gave out and I collapsed at the base of a tree, my whole body trembling. I stayed there, curled up, listening for footsteps. None came. Hours passed. The sky lightened. Dawn. I stood on shaky legs, every muscle aching. The forest looked different in the daylight, less menacing but still unfamiliar. I needed to find my way out. Then I heard it, the distant sound of rushing water. A river. If I followed it downstream, it would lead me somewhere. Took hours. My throat was raw, my lips cracked from thirst. But finally, the trees thinned. A road, a real paved road. Passing truck stopped when I waved it down. The driver took one look at me. Filthy, bleeding, wild-eyed, and didn't ask questions. Just drove me to the nearest town. The police listened to my story. They searched the area but found no cougar, no camp, no body. Just an empty forest. I didn't care. I was alive. I never hiked alone again, and I never ever ignored a map. I started my hike early in the morning, just as the sun was rising over the tree-covered hills. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine filled my lungs as I adjusted my backpack and took my first steps onto the trail. I had planned this solo trip for months, mapping out every detail and preparing for anything that could go wrong. But no matter how much you prepare, some things are beyond your control. The trail I had chosen was deep in the mountains, far from any town or major road. It was known for its beauty and isolation, which was exactly what I wanted. I needed time away from people, from work, from everything. Just me, the wilderness, and the sound of my boots crunching against the dirt path. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. The trail was well marked, the weather was perfect, and I felt stronger than I had in months. I moved steadily, taking in the scenery, pausing only to drink water or adjust my gear. But as I climbed higher, the trail became narrower, and the trees seemed to close in on me. The sun, once bright and warm, was now hidden behind thick branches, casting long, strange shadows across my path. Around midday, I reached a fork in the trail. My map showed that both paths led to my planned campsite, but one was slightly longer and had a steeper incline. I chose the shorter route, wanting to reach camp before dark. It was a decision I would regret later. At first, the path seemed fine, though more overgrown than I expected. I stepped carefully, brushing away low-hanging branches and watching for loose rocks. But soon, the trail became difficult to follow. The markers that were supposed to guide hikers were faded or missing, and I had to rely on my instincts and GPS to stay on track. The further I went, the more uncertain I became. The trees were dense, blocking most of the sky, and the silence around me felt unnatural. Then I noticed something odd. The ground was uneven, disturbed. It looked as if someone or something had dragged something heavy across the dirt. My first thought was an animal, maybe a deer or a bear, but there were no clear tracks, just strange, deep grooves in the soil. I shook it off and kept walking, but a sense of unease settled in my gut. About an hour later, I came across something even stranger. A torn piece of fabric was caught on a tree branch, fluttering slightly in the light breeze. It looked like part of a jacket, dark blue, worn. My stomach tightened. I wasn't the first person to take this route, but something about the fabric felt wrong, like whoever had worn it had been in trouble. I forced myself to keep going. The trail was getting steeper, and I had to use my hands to steady myself on the uneven terrain. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me gave way. I felt myself sliding, dirt and rocks tumbling with me as I lost control. I crashed hard against the ground, my backpack absorbing some of the impact, but my knee twisted painfully. For a moment, I just lay there, stunned. My hands were scraped, my clothes covered in dirt, and pain shot up my leg as I tried to move. I looked up to see how far I had fallen, maybe 15 feet. Not terrible, but enough to make climbing back up difficult. I checked my GPS. No signal. I wasn't surprised. The mountains blocked most cell service, which was why I had a satellite beacon. I reached for it, only to realize it was no longer clipped to my backpack. My stomach dropped. It must have fallen off during the slide. I scanned the area, trying to spot the bright orange device, but it was nowhere to be seen. My breathing quickened. I wasn't lost yet. I still had my map, but without the beacon, I had no way to call for help if I needed it. I pushed myself up, wincing as my knee protested. I could walk, but every step sent a sharp pain through my leg. I had no choice but to keep moving. I needed to find my way back to the main trail before dark. As I limped forward, the silence around me became overwhelming. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my boots. Then I smelled it. Something foul, something that didn't belong in the fresh mountain air. It was the stench of decay. I froze, my heart hammering. The smell was strong, coming from somewhere nearby. I didn't want to look, but my eyes were already scanning the area. A few yards ahead, half hidden by ferns and twisted branches, was something large and unmoving. A body. It took me a second to process what I was seeing. The body was face down, partially decomposed, clothing torn and dirt-stained. It had been there for a while. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I forced myself to step closer. I needed to know if it was recent, if whoever this was had been lost, like me. The man, judging by the size, had no backpack, no visible gear, just ragged clothing and skin stretched too tightly over bone. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were deep scratches in the dirt around the body, long, desperate marks, as if he had tried to claw his way forward before he died. I backed away, my mind racing. This wasn't a normal hiking accident. Something had happened to him. Something had kept him here, struggling until he couldn't fight anymore. I turned, my instincts screaming at me to leave. My knee throbbed, but I ignored the pain, moving as fast as I could. I didn't know where I was going anymore, just away from that place. The terrain was rough, and my vision blurred with panic. I stumbled, catching myself against a tree, gasping for breath. I needed to calm down, to think. I pulled out my map, hands shaking. If I could just... A sound, a low, steady rustling, coming from behind me. I turned my head slowly, every muscle in my body tense. The forest was still, too still. Then, just beyond the trees, I saw movement. Not an animal, not another hiker, something standing, watching. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. Every step sent agony through my knee, but I pushed forward, lungs burning, branches whipping against my arms. I needed to get back to the main trail, to anywhere but here. The footsteps behind me were fast, deliberate. Whoever, whatever it was, they weren't stumbling like I was. They knew this terrain. I saw a break in the trees ahead. Light, the trail. I forced my legs to move faster, ignoring the stabbing pain. The moment I burst onto the path, I turned and looked back. Nothing. The forest behind me was empty. No movement, no sound. Just trees and shadows. I didn't stop. I hobbled down the path, my breath ragged, my entire body trembling. It wasn't until I reached the parking lot hours later, just as the sun was setting, that I allowed myself to collapse against my car. I locked the doors, sat there for a long time, staring at the darkening trees. I never found my beacon, never reported the body. I don't know who or what I saw that day, but I know one thing: I will never hike alone again. I had always loved hiking alone. Something about the isolation, the steady rhythm of my footsteps, and the sound of nature around me made me feel at peace. The idea of pushing my body through miles of untamed land, of moving through spaces untouched by human hands, gave me a sense of freedom I rarely found anywhere else. But that feeling changed one summer when I took a trip that I would never forget. It was a late afternoon when I arrived at the trailhead. I had done my research. This was a lesser-known hiking route deep in the mountains, one that promised incredible views and solitude, the kind of place where you wouldn't run into another soul for miles. That was exactly what I wanted. Just me and nature with nothing to distract me. I carried enough supplies: food, water, a flashlight, a map, and a compass. I also had my phone, but I knew service would be non-existent this deep in the woods. The trail started off normal, winding through thick forests of pine and oak. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting flickering shadows across the dirt path. The scent of damp earth and wood surrounded me as I moved further in, my boots crunching over fallen twigs and dry leaves. The only sounds were the birds chirping and the occasional rustle of small animals darting through the underbrush. About 2 hours in, the trail became noticeably steeper. I adjusted my backpack, tightening the straps and wiping sweat from my forehead. As I climbed, the trees thinned out, revealing glimpses of the valley below. The view was breathtaking, stretching far into the distance where rolling hills met the sky. I stopped for a moment to take it in, catching my breath before pressing forward. I had planned to reach a high ridge where I would set up camp for the night. It wasn't until I reached the halfway point that I started noticing something was off. The first thing that struck me was the silence. The birds had stopped chirping. The rustling of animals in the brush had disappeared. The usual background noise of the forest was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you weren't alone, like something was watching you. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. Then I saw the footprints. At first, I thought they were mine, but when I looked closer, I realized they weren't. They were fresh, too fresh. Someone else had walked this trail not long before me. But the odd thing was that the tracks were inconsistent, almost like whoever left them had been stumbling or dragging their feet. I followed them with my eyes, tracing them further up the path until they suddenly veered off into the trees. That was when I smelled it. A foul, rancid odor. It was faint at first, but as I moved forward, it grew stronger. It was the unmistakable scent of decay. I covered my nose with my sleeve, my stomach twisting at the stench. I hesitated. Everything in me told me to turn back, to forget about whatever was ahead and leave. But I had come this far, and I convinced myself it was probably just a dead animal. I kept going. Minutes later, I found the source. A deer carcass lay sprawled across the trail, its body twisted unnaturally. The flesh was torn open, exposing ribs and organs. Flies buzzed around it, the sound almost deafening in the quiet. But what disturbed me the most was that the body was fresh. Too fresh. There were no signs of scavengers, no typical injuries from a predator. It was as if something had killed it and left it there without feeding on it. My gut told me to turn back. I wasn't armed. I had no way to protect myself if a predator was nearby. But there was a part of me that didn't want to admit I was scared. So I stepped around the carcass and kept moving. As the hours passed, the unease never left me. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting between trees, a shift in the underbrush that didn't match the wind. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. The sun had started to dip below the horizon when I finally reached the ridge. I set up my tent quickly, trying to ignore the persistent feeling of unease. The view was stunning, stretching for miles across untouched wilderness, but I barely noticed it. The woods felt different now. I wasn't enjoying the solitude anymore. I felt exposed. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jolt awake. The wind rustling the trees sounded too much like footsteps. The distant howls of coyotes sent chills down my spine. At one point, I thought I heard breathing outside my tent. I held my breath, listening, but after what felt like an eternity, it stopped. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was heading back. I packed up quickly and started down the trail, moving faster than I had on the way up. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. If anything, it had gotten worse. Then I saw the footprints again, but this time they were behind mine. They hadn't been there when I climbed up the day before. Someone had followed me, and they had stopped just a few feet away from where my tent had been. I moved even faster, my heart pounding. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't stop for water. I just kept going, my only focus on getting back to my car. The forest around me felt alive, like it was closing in. Every rustle, every snap of a twig sent adrenaline surging through me. I was about a mile from the trailhead when I heard it. A branch snapped behind me. Not the kind of sound an animal makes, this was deliberate. A footstep. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty trail stretching behind me. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I threw my pack into the back seat, locked the doors, and sped off without looking back. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't know who or what was out there that night. I never reported it. I didn't know what I would even say. But I do know one thing. I'll never hike alone again. I had always been an experienced hiker. I knew how to read the land, follow trails, and respect nature. I wasn't careless, and I wasn't a beginner. But that day, none of my experience mattered. Started as a normal solo hike, just how I liked it. I was in the mountains of Montana, deep in the backcountry, far from any roads or cell service. I had planned a 3-day trek through rugged terrain, following an old trail that had mostly been forgotten. The maps I studied showed the route was still there, but I knew better than to trust a line on paper. Trails fade, and nature reclaims what people leave behind. The first day was uneventful. The air was crisp, the sky a perfect blue, and the smell of pine surrounded me. The climb was tough, but I enjoyed the challenge. By the time the sun dipped below the peaks, I had made it to a small clearing where I set up camp. I cooked, ate, and sat in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the forest. It was peaceful. The second day is when things started to go wrong. The trail had been faint the day before, but by the time I reached midday, it was completely gone. No footprints, no markers, nothing but thick trees and uneven ground. This wasn't unexpected. I had my compass, my map, and enough supplies to last. I wasn't worried. First, I adjusted my path, cutting through a dense section of woods, stepping carefully over thick roots and loose stones. The further I went, the harder the hike became. The trees pressed in, the ground became steeper, and the air felt heavy. It was as if the forest itself didn't want me there. Then I smelled it. Rot. Something had died nearby. I pushed forward, assuming it was an animal carcass. But the smell didn't fade. It grew stronger, thicker, until I could taste it. I covered my nose with my sleeve and kept walking. The last thing I wanted was to find whatever was causing that stench, but I needed to get through. Then I saw something strange. The trees were marked, not by people, at least not in any way I had seen before. Large scratches, deep and uneven, ran along the trunks at shoulder height. Some were fresh, the wood beneath raw and splintered. Others were older, darkened with age. I had seen claw marks before. Bears, cougars, even wolverines, but these weren't right. The spacing was odd, the angles unnatural. I told myself it had to be some territorial animal, maybe several fighting over the same land. But deep down, something felt wrong. I kept going. The land sloped upward, and every step became a battle. My legs burned. My breath came in short bursts. I should have turned back, retraced my steps, but I was stubborn. I had planned for 3 days, and I wasn't about to quit on day 2. Then I found the bones. First, I thought it was a pile of branches, but as I stepped closer, I saw them clearly. A deer, or what was left of one. The bones were scattered, some cracked open. The skull was missing, and the ribs had been pulled apart as if something had torn through them with ease. I crouched down, scanning the ground. No tracks, no drag marks, no sign of a struggle. Just bones, picked clean, resting on a patch of dry earth where nothing grew. A deep unease settled in my chest. I wasn't alone. Something was out here, and it wasn't following any pattern I understood. I gripped my knife tighter and forced myself to move forward. The rest of the day was a blur of thick brush, steep climbs, and the nagging feeling that I was being watched. Every so often, I would catch movement in my peripheral vision. Just a flicker, a shadow slipping between the trees. Each time I turned, there was nothing. By nightfall, I was exhausted. I found a relatively flat spot near a cluster of boulders and set up camp. I built a fire, larger than usual, and sat close to it. The woods around me were too quiet. No insects, no distant owl calls. Just silence, heavy and unnatural. I didn't sleep well. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig sent my heart racing. My knife stayed in my hand all night, gripped so tightly my fingers ached. By dawn, I had made a decision. I was going back. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to meet it. The journey back should have been easier. I had my bearings, I had my tracks to follow. But the forest had changed. The trees looked different, the landscape unfamiliar. The trail I had made was gone. Panic crept in, but I forced it down. I checked my compass and adjusted my course. I would get out. Then I heard it. A sound, low and guttural, somewhere in the distance. It wasn't a growl, not exactly. More like a deep exhale, rough and deliberate. It was close. I moved faster, not quite running, but not taking my time either. My heart pounded as I scanned the trees, looking for movement. I saw nothing, but I felt it. Then the smell returned. It hit me in a wave, thick and nauseating. My stomach turned, and I swallowed hard to keep from gagging. It was stronger than before, as if whatever had caused it was right beside me. I didn't look. I didn't stop. I walked faster, forcing my legs to move, ignoring the burning in my muscles. Something snapped behind me, a branch heavy and deliberate. I ran. I didn't care about direction anymore, didn't care about my map or my bearings. I just ran. My pack bounced against my back, branches whipped at my face, but I didn't slow down. Then I saw it. Not clearly, not fully, just a shape between the trees, something tall, something moving. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It was something else. I pushed myself harder, lungs screaming, vision blurring. I didn't stop until I burst into a clearing, stumbling to my knees. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and in the distance, I saw something that nearly made me cry in relief. A marker. A wooden post, half-rotted, but still standing. A sign of civilization. I forced myself up and kept moving. The rest of the hike was a haze. I don't remember how long it took me to get back to my car, only that when I finally reached it, I collapsed against the door, gasping for breath. I never went back, never tried to figure out what was out there. Some things aren't meant to be understood. Some places aren't meant to be walked. I remember the day clearly. It was supposed to be a simple solo hike. Just me, the trail, and the fresh mountain air. I had done this route before, a long loop through the forested hills, a steady incline leading up to a ridge with a breathtaking view of the valley below. The hike was about 15 miles round trip, a challenge, but nothing I couldn't handle. I set out early in the morning. The weather was perfect. Cool air, clear skies, and a light breeze that rustled the leaves. My backpack was packed with everything I needed: water, energy bars, a first aid kit, an extra layer, a flashlight, and my phone with an external battery. I wasn't reckless. I had planned everything. The first few miles were peaceful. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air. The path was well trodden, and I could hear birds chirping in the distance. Occasionally, I'd stop to take in the view or listen to the sound of the wind through the trees. It was the kind of solitude I loved, no distractions, just me and nature. Around mile 5, I noticed something odd. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling, no distant animal sounds, just silence. First, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe I had simply tuned everything out. But as I kept walking, the silence stayed. Even my own footsteps felt muffled. Then I saw the footprints. They were fresh, pressed deep into the dirt. But they weren't normal. They were erratic, like someone had been running. And they weren't heading in one direction. They doubled back, veered off the trail, then returned. Whoever left them had been moving unpredictably. My stomach tightened. I wasn't alone. I kept walking, more aware of my surroundings now. The trees seemed denser. Shadows stretched across the path, even though the sun was still high. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual this deep in the woods, but it still made me uneasy. A mile later, I came across something that made my blood run cold. A backpack. It was half unzipped, its contents spilled across the ground. A water bottle, some granola bars, a map. No ID, no phone, no sign of the owner. The strangest part? The straps were torn, like someone had yanked them apart with force. I crouched, examining the bag closer. No blood, no claw marks, just torn straps. Maybe it had been abandoned, but why? And why was there no sign of whoever left it behind? My brain told me to turn back, but I was more than halfway through the loop. I figured I might come across the owner up ahead. Maybe they needed help, so I kept going. The footprints reappeared, more erratic now. I started noticing broken branches, scuffed dirt, signs of a struggle. I wasn't sure what to think. The silence pressed down on me, heavy and unnatural. Every step felt like I was being watched. My breathing was louder than it should have been. My heart pounded in my chest. Then I saw it, a single hiking boot, sitting in the middle of the path. My throat tightened. There was no blood, no torn fabric around it. Just a lone boot, as if someone had stepped out of it and vanished. The laces were still tied. My first instinct was to call out, but something stopped me. The silence. It wasn't normal. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. I took a step back. My gut screamed at me to turn around, to go back the way I came. But then I heard something, a crunch, like a footstep, close, too close. I spun around, scanning the trees. Nothing, just endless woods. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe my own nerves were getting the best of me. I needed to keep moving. I picked up the pace, practically speedwalking now. Every sound made my skin crawl. A branch snapping, a leaf rustling. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone following me? Watching me? The footprints made no sense. They were scattered, directionless, as if whoever left them had been lost, confused, or worse. Then I saw another backpack. This one was shredded, the fabric torn to ribbons. A jacket lay nearby, sleeves twisted, one arm inside out. That was enough. I wasn't staying any longer. I turned and started back the way I came, my pulse hammering. Every step felt heavier, like the forest was closing in on me. My ears strained for any sound, but the silence was complete, too complete. Then I saw them, more footprints, but they weren't ahead of me. They were behind me. Someone had been following me. My skin prickled. I glanced around, scanning the trees, but nothing moved. No shadows, no figures, just emptiness. My breathing was ragged now, panic threatening to take over. I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't running. Running made you sloppy. Running made noise. I moved quickly but carefully, retracing my steps. The sun had shifted, shadows stretching longer. I needed to get out before dark. Every so often, I'd glance back. The footprints were still there, still fresh. Someone was behind me. I never heard them, never saw them, but they were there. I walked faster. My legs ached. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I refused to stop. The miles stretched on. The silence pressed in. Then finally I saw it, the trailhead. My car. My lifeline. I practically ran the last 100 yards. I threw open the door, jumped in, and locked it. My hands shook as I started the engine. My headlights flooded the trees. And for just a second, a fraction of a second, I thought I saw movement. A shape, a figure standing just beyond the reach of the light. Then it was gone. I didn't wait. I peeled out of there, gravel spraying. I didn't stop until I was miles away. I never reported it. What would I say? That I found some footprints and a couple of abandoned backpacks? That I felt like I was being followed? It wouldn't have mattered. But I never went back. And sometimes late at night I wonder, who left those footprints? And where did they go? I had been planning this solo hike for months. The trail was deep in the northern wilderness, a stretch of rough terrain with miles of forest, rivers, and jagged cliffs. It wasn't a touristy spot. That was the appeal. No crowds, no artificial paths, just pure, untouched nature. I had studied the maps, checked the weather, packed the essentials. Everything was set for a 3-day trip, deep into the woods, then looping back. The first day was perfect. The air was crisp, the kind that fills your lungs with freshness. Birds called from the treetops, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush reminding me I wasn't alone. I followed the marked trail for a while, but then veered off, heading toward a ridge I had read about in an old hiking forum. It wasn't an official path, but people had done it. That was enough for me. The climb was tough. The incline burned my legs, but the view was worth it. The trees stretched endlessly, a sea of green rolling over hills and valleys. I set up camp by a small, clear stream, ate my packed meal, and watched the sunset. It was peaceful, isolating, but in a good way. Just me and the wild. I crawled into my tent, zipped up my sleeping bag, and let the sounds of the forest lull me to sleep. Sometime in the night, I woke up. It wasn't a dream. Something had pulled me out of sleep, but I didn't know what. The forest was different at night. The sounds were sharper, closer. I lay still, listening. A branch snapped, not far from my tent. A deer? Maybe a raccoon? I stayed quiet, breathing slow. Then I heard it again. Closer. Something was moving just beyond the thin layer of fabric between me and the outside. I reached for my flashlight, hand shaking slightly. I flicked it on and pointed it toward the tent's wall. The light created a faint glow, revealing a shape outside. It wasn't an animal. It was tall. Person. My heart pounded. I listened harder. No breathing, no footsteps, just the distant creak of trees swaying. I waited, staring at the shadow. After what felt like forever, it moved, stepping away. Leaves crunched under its weight. Then silence. I sat there, gripping the flashlight, unable to sleep for the rest of the night. Morning couldn't come fast enough. I unzipped my tent slowly, scanning the area. Nothing, just trees, rocks, and the stream. But then I saw them. Footprints, large and deep, circling my tent. My stomach turned. Someone had been there, watching. I wasn't alone. I packed fast. I had no plan other than to move. Maybe I had spooked them, and they had left. Maybe they had just been a lost hiker. Maybe, but I wasn't taking any chances. I took a different route, pushing through thick brush, making my way back toward the main trail. My pace was fast, too fast. I tripped, scraped my hands, but kept going. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow made my breath catch. After hours of walking, I stopped to rest.
My legs ached, my water was low.
I checked my map. I was close to the river that ran parallel to the main trail. If I reached it, I could follow it back. I took a sip from my bottle, listening. Nothing but the sounds of the forest. Normal sounds. Birds, wind, the distant rush of water. I exhaled, forcing myself to calm down. Then I saw it, hanging from a low tree branch ahead. Piece of fabric, dirty and torn. My breath hitched. It was my bandana, the one I had lost on the first day. But I hadn't come this way before. Someone had found it and left it here. A warning? A message? I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my pack and ran. Branches whipped at my face. Roots tried to trip me, but I didn't stop. The river was close. I could hear it. I just had to reach it. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. Then the ground gave out beneath me. I tumbled down a steep hill, crashing through bushes and dirt, finally landing hard at the bottom. Pain shot through my arm. I groaned, pushing myself up. The river was right there, but so was something else. Footprints in the mud, fresh, leading into the trees. I didn't stop. I followed the river, moving as fast as my bruised body allowed. My head spun, my vision blurred. I had to keep going. The sun was getting lower, and I couldn't spend another night out here, not with whoever was out there. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A wooden bridge, the sign for the main trail just beyond it. Relief flooded me. I sprinted, ignoring the pain, and didn't stop until I was back on the well-worn path. I looked back once. The forest was still, empty, but I knew better. I walked the last miles in silence, every step feeling heavier. When I reached my car, I locked the doors the second I got inside. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, but even as I drove away, the feeling didn't leave me. The feeling that someone had been out there, watching, waiting. I never went back to that trail, never told anyone what happened. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the crunch of leaves, still see that shadow standing outside my tent. And I wonder, how close had they gotten? How long had they watched me? And why didn't they do anything? Yet, I don't know why I thought hiking alone was a good idea. I guess I wanted a break from everything. Work, people, the noise of the city. I had done some solo hikes before, but never anything too far from civilization. This time, I wanted something different, something deeper into the wild. So, I picked a remote trail up in the mountains, about a 4-hour drive from home. It was supposed to be peaceful, quiet. I wasn't expecting anything more than fresh air and solitude. The drive out there was uneventful. Long stretches of empty road, a few gas stations here and there. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was already starting to dip behind the trees. I checked my gear, water, food, flashlight, extra batteries, knife, emergency beacon. Everything was there. I wasn't stupid. I knew being alone in the wilderness meant I had to be prepared. I had studied the trail, checked the weather. No storms, no extreme conditions. Just me and the quiet. The first few miles were perfect. The forest was dense, the air crisp. Birds called from the branches above, and I could hear the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The trail wasn't marked well, but I had a map and a GPS. I wasn't worried. I followed the path as it wound through the trees, up rocky inclines, and over small streams. The only thing that nagged at me was the silence. It was too quiet. No wind, no distant hum of insects, just my boots crunching on dirt and leaves. After a few hours, I set up camp in a small clearing. I ate, drank some water, and sat by my small fire, listening to the sounds of the forest. It was peaceful, but as the night went on, something felt off. The quiet had turned into a kind of pressure, like the air itself was heavier. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I wasn't used to being so far from people. I forced myself to sleep. A noise woke me up in the middle of the night. Not a loud one, just a soft shuffle, like something moving through the leaves. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam around. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I listened, holding my breath. Silence. Maybe a deer. Maybe just my imagination. I lay back down, but sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, I packed up and kept moving. The trail grew steeper, rougher. I had to use my hands to climb in some spots, pulling myself over boulders and exposed roots. By midday, I stopped for water near a small stream. That's when I noticed something strange. The footprints, not mine, fresh ones, leading off into the trees, barefoot. I stared at them for a long time. They weren't animal tracks. They were human. But who hikes barefoot this deep in the woods? I followed them a few steps, but they disappeared into the undergrowth. No sign of where they went. I felt uneasy, but I pushed it away. People did weird things. Maybe some nature enthusiast, maybe some local who knew the land better than I did. I kept going, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The deeper I went, the worse it got. The forest changed. The trees looked twisted, gnarled, their bark stripped in places. The air smelled off, rotting, damp, like something was decaying nearby. I picked up my pace, heart pounding for no reason I could explain. Then I saw it. A tent. Not mine. Not new. Old, weathered, sagging. It sat just off the trail, half hidden by brush. I hesitated, then stepped closer. The fabric was torn, stained with something dark. I crouched down, peering inside. Empty, but there were things left behind. An old backpack, shredded clothes, a rusted knife. I touched nothing. Something about it made my skin crawl. I told myself to keep moving, to ignore it. But then I noticed the silence again. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my breathing. And then another sound. Footsteps, close. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing, but I knew what I heard. The forest wasn't empty. Someone was out here, watching. I didn't run. Running meant panic, and panic got people killed. I walked, fast, steady, eyes scanning the trees. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I checked my GPS, still on track. I just needed to get through the last stretch, get back to my car. The sun was getting lower. Shadows stretched long across the trail. My legs burned, my breathing ragged, but I kept moving. Every so often, I heard something behind me, a branch snapping, leaves rustling. I never saw anything, but I felt it, the weight of eyes on me. Then I saw something ahead, a structure, not a cabin, not a campsite, just a frame, like someone had started building a shelter and never finished. Wooden beams, half standing, no roof, no walls, just bones of something that never was. And in the center, something worse, pile of bones. Animal, maybe, maybe not. Stripped clean, scattered like someone had been picking through them. I stopped, every muscle in my body screaming to turn around. But then I heard it again. Behind me, closer. I didn't think. I ran. Branches whipped at my face. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I could hear something behind me now, heavy, fast. I didn't look back. Looking back meant slowing down. I sprinted, following the trail, praying I was going the right way. Then I saw it. The trailhead. My car. Just a few more steps. My hands fumbled for my keys, yanking the door open. I threw myself inside, slammed the lock. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys. The engine roared to life. In the rearview mirror, I saw nothing. Just trees, shadows. Empty. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I don't know what was out there. Person? Something else? I don't know. But I do know one thing. I'm never hiking alone again. I had been planning this solo hiking trip for months. The goal was to push myself, both physically and mentally, by tackling one of the more remote trails deep in the Rocky Mountains. The route was barely maintained, winding through dense forest, steep inclines, and isolated valleys that hadn't seen human footprints in days, maybe even weeks. I wasn't worried. I had experience with tough trails, and I packed accordingly. A sturdy tent, extra food, emergency supplies, and my satellite GPS in case I got lost. I felt prepared. The first day was uneventful. The air was crisp, the kind of clean mountain air that fills your lungs and makes you feel alive. The trail was steep in some places, winding through thick evergreens and across rocky streams. I made good progress and set up camp just before sundown in a small clearing near a stream. The only sounds were the occasional hoot of an owl and the distant rustling of something moving through the underbrush. Probably just a deer. I cooked a simple meal, enjoyed the quiet, and drifted off to sleep, my body pleasantly exhausted from the day's hike. The second day was where things started to feel off. The trail was supposed to be well marked, even in its remoteness, but as I climbed higher, the markers became more sporadic. First, I shrugged it off. It wasn't uncommon for trail markers to fade or get covered by overgrown branches. But then, I came across something strange. A broken tree, fresh splinters scattered on the ground, the wood still raw and pale. It wasn't snapped by wind or age. It looked more like it had been forced down. Something strong had done this. Maybe a bear? I gripped my bear spray tighter and moved on, ignoring the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. By mid-afternoon, the terrain had become unfamiliar. I should have reached a small plateau by now, but instead, I was descending into a valley I didn't recognize. My GPS showed I was slightly off course, but not by much. I adjusted my direction and kept moving. The trees were thicker here, the canopy blocking out a lot of sunlight, making it feel later than it actually was. Every now and then, I'd hear something moving in the brush. Not quite close, but not far either. I tried to tell myself it was just my nerves. I hiked for another 2 hours before deciding to set up camp. I found a relatively flat area and pitched my tent, but something about the spot unsettled me. It was too quiet. The usual hum of insects and birds was almost non-existent. It wasn't normal. I sat by my small fire, eating my meal in silence, my ears straining for any sound beyond the crackling flames. Then, just as I was about to turn in for the night, I heard it. A single, deliberate footstep. Not an animal scurrying through the underbrush. Not the rustling of wind through the leaves. A footstep, heavy, purposeful. I froze, every hair on my body standing up. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it around the trees. Nothing, just darkness and the reflection of my own breath in the cold night air. I told myself I was imagining things, that exhaustion was playing tricks on me, but I still kept my knife close when I finally forced myself to lie down. Sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy and uneasy. I packed up quickly and checked my GPS. I wasn't as far off as I thought, but I had definitely veered from the main trail. I needed to correct my path before I got truly lost. As I hiked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like I wasn't alone. Every so often, I'd catch what looked like movement in my peripheral vision, a flicker of shadow between the trees, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing. Around midday, I stumbled onto something that made my stomach drop. A footprint. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't from a boot. It was barefoot, human. The size suggested an adult, but what chilled me was how deep it was. Whoever left it had been moving fast or running, and the direction, it was heading the same way I was going. I told myself it was just an old print, that maybe some reckless hiker had passed through here in better weather. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. I walked faster. By late afternoon, the landscape had changed again. The trees thinned, opening into a stretch of rocky terrain with large boulders and steep inclines. I was relieved. I'd be able to see more around me, less places for something to hide. Then I smelled it. A foul, rotten stench like decaying meat covered my nose, gagging. There was no mistaking that smell. Something had died nearby. My first thought was a deer, maybe something a predator had taken down. But as I followed the scent, my breath caught in my throat. A campsite, abandoned. The tent was collapsed, torn open from the side. The fabric was stained dark. At first, I thought it was mud, but as I got closer, I saw it wasn't. It was blood. Scattered belongings were strewn about. An old backpack, a rusted cooking pot, a single hiking boot lying on its side. Whoever had camped here had left in a hurry. Or worse, they hadn't left at all. Panic gripped me. My rational mind screamed to turn around, to go back the way I came. But a darker thought lingered. If I went back, I'd have to go through those trees again, past whatever had been watching me. I decided to move forward, to get out of this place as fast as possible. I hiked relentlessly, pushing myself past exhaustion. The sun was starting to dip below the ridgeline when I finally saw it. A signpost in the distance, weathered, barely readable, but it marked the trail I had originally intended to follow. Relief flooded through me. I was back on course. I didn't stop moving until I reached a ranger station just before sundown. The ranger on duty listened as I breathlessly recounted everything. The footprints, the sounds, the abandoned campsite. He didn't say much, just nodded and took down notes. Then, he sighed and said something that made my stomach turn. "You're not the first to report this." I left the next morning, taking a safer, more traveled route back to civilization. I never found out what happened at that abandoned campsite. I never got an answer for the footprints. But I do know one thing: I wasn't alone out there. I always thought I was good at reading the land. I'd hiked for years, alone most of the time, through deep forests, high mountain passes, and across miles of barren desert. I trusted my instincts, trusted my map, trusted the feeling in my gut when something wasn't right. But that day in the Cascade Wilderness, I learned how quickly confidence can turn into helplessness, and how silence can become the most terrifying thing of all. It started like any other trip. A solo hike into a part of the forest I'd never explored. A place so deep and untouched I doubted many people had ever set foot there. It wasn't on the main maps, just a narrow side trail I'd found on an old online forum. The post said it was isolated, difficult, but worth it. Those were the places I lived for. The trail began steep, winding through thick evergreens, the scent of pine and damp earth filling the air. The first few miles were peaceful, just the sound of my boots on dirt and the occasional rustle of something moving in the undergrowth. I was used to that: deer, squirrels, maybe a bear if I was unlucky, but nothing ever felt off. Not yet. About 4 hours in, I reached a plateau with a clearing where I decided to take a break. I set my pack down, took a long drink of water, and checked my map. That was the first time I noticed something strange. The trail I was following, the one marked on the forum map, wasn't on my paper map. That wasn't unusual. Not all trails were documented. But what bothered me was how the terrain didn't match up. I should have been near a small creek, but there was nothing, just trees and silence. I brushed it off, assuming I'd misread something. I kept moving. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of the forest, birds, insects, even the wind through the trees, seemed to fade. My own footsteps felt too loud, crunching over dead leaves and twigs. I stopped a few times just to listen, expecting to hear something, but there was nothing, just dead silence. I kept telling myself it was just in my head, but my gut was tight, my body on edge in a way I couldn't explain. That was when I saw the first sign something was wrong. A boot print, fresh. Someone else had been here recently, but it wasn't a normal hiking tread. It was deep, pressed harder into the soil than a person's step should be, like whoever made it was carrying something heavy, or dragging something. My first thought was a hunter, maybe hauling out a kill, but there were no blood drops, no signs of an animal being moved, just the print leading further up the trail. I followed, my senses on high alert. Another 50 yards ahead, I found something else. A backpack, old, faded, half buried in the undergrowth like it had been there for years. I knelt beside it, brushing off the dirt. The zippers were open, the contents spilled out. Moldy clothes, a rusted camping stove, a water bottle with a name scratched into the plastic. L. Reed. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I didn't know the name, but something about the pack's condition was wrong. It hadn't been there for years, despite how it looked. The fabric wasn't rotted through, the water bottle was still intact, and there was no moss growing inside. It had been left there recently, but purposely made to look old. Something was wrong. I stood up, looking around, and that's when I saw the second set of footprints. Not deep like the first ones, lighter, scattered, almost like someone had been running or being chased. I suddenly felt exposed, standing there in the middle of the trail. I wasn't alone, and whoever had left those tracks, whoever had dropped that backpack, had been in a hurry to get away from something. I turned back the way I came, deciding to head back to my car. I'd seen enough, but as I walked, the forest didn't look the same. The trees seemed closer. The light through the canopy was dimmer, and the trail that had been clear before was now covered in fresh leaves, like no one had walked on it for weeks. I checked my compass. The needle spun lazily before settling in a direction that didn't feel right. I tried to stay calm, moving quickly but carefully. I knew how easy it was to get turned around in dense woods, but the feeling in my gut told me this wasn't just disorientation. It was something else, something I didn't understand. The first noise I heard in hours was a twig snapping somewhere behind me. Not an animal, a deliberate step. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, keeping my pace steady, resisting the urge to run. Running in the wilderness only got you lost faster. But as I moved, so did the sound behind me. Always just far enough back that I couldn't see who or what it was. Then I saw it. Another backpack. This one newer, blue with a torn strap, lying just off the trail. I didn't stop. I didn't need to check the name. I knew it belonged to someone else who had come this way. Someone who hadn't made it out. My heart pounded as I pushed forward, my only goal now to reach my car. The path twisted, turned, and I knew I should have hit the main trail by now. I should have seen familiar landmarks, but nothing looked right. I was walking in circles, and the footsteps behind me were getting closer. I broke. I ran. Screw staying calm. Screw keeping my bearings. I sprinted, branches whipping my face, my breath ragged. The sound behind me sped up too. Faster. Closer. Then, without warning, the trees thinned, and I stumbled out onto a gravel road. My car was there, right where I'd left it. I didn't question it. I didn't look back. I just threw myself inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys. As I peeled away, I forced myself to glance in the rearview mirror. Nothing, just the empty trailhead. I never reported what I found. What would I say? That I got lost? That I found someone's pack? That I felt like something was out there, following me? None of it made sense. None of it would be believed. But I know what I felt. I know what I heard. And I know I'll never go back. I don't know why I went alone. I told myself it was for the peace, the quiet, the solitude. Something about getting away from everything, just me and the wilderness, sounded good. A break from work, from noise, from people. No service, no distractions. Just the mountains, the trees, and the trail. I picked a trail I'd read about online. Secluded but not too remote, long enough to be challenging but not dangerous. It was deep in the forest, winding up into the hills, through valleys and along ridges. A full-day hike, nothing too extreme. I packed my bag with the essentials: water, protein bars, a knife, flashlight, a basic first aid kit, and an emergency whistle. I double-checked everything before leaving, making sure I had what I needed. The forecast was clear. I parked my car at the trailhead early in the morning. The lot was empty. No other hikers, no cars, just mine. I told myself that was fine. It was what I wanted. I locked my car, adjusted my pack, and started up the trail. First, everything was perfect. The forest was thick, sunlight filtering through the leaves. The air smelled fresh, damp with the scent of moss and pine. The dirt path was narrow but well-maintained, lined with rocks and tree roots. Birds chirped, and in the distance, I heard the rustling of something moving through the underbrush, probably a squirrel or a deer. Normal forest sounds. I hiked for hours, enjoying the silence. I stopped occasionally to drink water and check my map, making sure I was on track. The trail twisted through the hills, leading higher into the mountains. The trees grew denser, the path steeper. The air cooled as I gained elevation. I welcomed the solitude. Then, things started to feel off. It wasn't sudden, but gradual. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The birds stopped chirping. The rustling in the bushes ceased. Even the wind through the trees felt muted. Just my breathing, my footsteps crunching on the dirt. That was all I could hear. I pushed forward, trying to shake the feeling. It was just the forest, just nature. But I kept checking over my shoulder, feeling watched. Every now and then, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Something shifting in the trees, a dark shape between the trunks. Every time I turned my head, there was nothing. At some point, I realized the trail was different. I wasn't sure how or when it had changed, but it wasn't matching the map anymore. The terrain seemed unfamiliar. The path twisted in ways I didn't remember. I stopped and unfolded the map, trying to orient myself. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn, but there were no forks, no junctions, just one trail leading forward. I checked my phone. No signal. That was expected, but still, it added to my unease. I took a deep breath and decided to keep going. The trail had to lead somewhere. As I walked, I saw something up ahead, a piece of cloth tangled in a branch. It was faded, old-looking, not weathered like it had been there for years, but long enough to seem abandoned. I hesitated before pulling it free. A torn piece of a shirt, dirty, the edges frayed. I kept moving. The silence pressed down on me. My footsteps felt too loud. Every so often, I thought I heard something behind me, soft, deliberate steps. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. Panic started creeping in. I wasn't alone. I told myself it was paranoia, that the isolation was getting to me, but my gut told me otherwise. I picked up my pace. My legs ached from the incline, but I pushed forward. I needed to get out. Then I saw the boot, half buried in the dirt, torn and scuffed. The laces frayed, the sole coming apart. It looked like it had been there for a while, but not long enough to be ancient. Next to it, the ground looked disturbed, like something had been dragged through the dirt. I turned around. Something moved between the trees. A shadow, too big for an animal, too fast for a person. My heart slammed against my ribs. I tightened my grip on my knife. I didn't run. Running felt wrong, like it would trigger something, like whatever was out there was waiting for me to panic. Instead, I walked, quick and steady, scanning the trees. I needed to get back to my car. The trail felt longer than before. The trees looked different. The ground sloped in ways I didn't remember. I started to sweat, my breathing ragged. Every step, the feeling of being followed grew stronger. Then I heard it. A snap. A branch breaking. Close. Too close. I spun around, knife raised. Nothing. Just the trees. Just the silence. My skin prickled. My mind screamed at me to move. I kept walking faster now. The path blurred together. Every part of me was on high alert. My ears strained for any sound. My eyes darted from tree to tree. And then I saw it. A figure. Not an animal. Not a person. A shape standing between the trees, just out of focus. Tall, unmoving. Watching. I didn't think. I ran. Branches scraped my arms. My pack bounced against my back. The forest twisted around me, the path shifting under my feet. I didn't know if I was going the right way. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. The figure didn't chase. It didn't need to. It was always there, behind me, beside me, ahead of me. The trees closed in. My lungs burned. My legs ached. My vision blurred. Then suddenly the trees thinned. I stumbled into the clearing where I had parked. My car was there. My hands fumbled for my keys. I threw the door open, scrambled inside, locked it. My breath came in gasps. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering. I stared at the tree line, waiting, watching. Nothing moved. After what felt like hours, I started the car and drove. I didn't look back. I don't know what I saw. I don't want to know. I just know I'll never hike alone again. I had always loved hiking alone. There was something about being out in the wild, away from everything, that made me feel free. No noise except the wind, the birds, and my own breath. No people, no cars, no distractions. Just me and the trail. This time, I picked a trail that was farther out than usual. It was a long drive to get there, and it wasn't a popular route. That was part of the appeal. I had checked the maps, made sure I knew the way, packed enough food and water for the trip. It wasn't supposed to be anything crazy, just a long, quiet hike through some deep forest and hills. I planned to camp overnight and head back the next morning. The first few miles were perfect. The air was crisp, the trees stretched high above me, and the trail was soft under my boots. The forest was dense, but I felt comfortable. The deeper I went, the quieter everything got. The only sounds were my footsteps and the occasional rustling of leaves. A few hours in, I noticed something off. It wasn't anything obvious, just a feeling, like the forest had changed somehow. The trees felt closer together, the air heavier. I tried to shake it off and kept walking. It wasn't unusual to get a little spooked when you were alone in the middle of nowhere. My mind was probably playing tricks on me. Around mid-afternoon, I found a small clearing and decided to rest. I sat on a fallen log, pulled out a protein bar, and took a long drink from my bottle. The place was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. I tried to ignore it, but something about the silence made my skin crawl. Then I saw it. Just beyond the clearing, barely visible between the trees, was a tent. Old, faded, and collapsed like it had been abandoned for a long time. I hadn't seen any signs of people on the trail, no footprints, no trash. But here was this tent hidden away. I stood up, hesitating. Part of me wanted to check it out, but another part of me screamed to leave it alone. I took a few steps closer. The fabric was torn in places, and the poles were snapped, like something had crashed into it. Beside it, half buried under leaves, was a backpack. I nudged it with my boot. It was covered in dirt and looked like it had been there for months, maybe longer. Something about it felt wrong. I had come across abandoned camps before, but this one was different. There was no gear scattered around, no sign of an old fire, nothing. Just a wrecked tent and a pack left behind. I turned away. I didn't want to be near it any longer. I didn't want to know whose it was or why it was there. It was none of my business. I shouldered my bag and moved on, forcing myself to focus on the trail ahead. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I walked, I started hearing things. At first, it was just the occasional rustle, something small moving through the underbrush. Then it became more. Branches snapping, heavy footsteps. I stopped, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe. A bear. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The steps weren't random like an animal wandering through the woods. They were deliberate, steady. I kept moving, walking faster now. The sun was getting lower, and I needed to find a good spot to set up camp. But no matter how far I went, the sounds followed. I turned suddenly, scanning the trees. I saw nothing, just endless forest, shadows stretching as the daylight faded. But I could feel it, something watching me. I picked up my pace. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'd find a clearing, set up my tent, make a fire. Fire would keep animals away. Fire would make me feel safer. When I finally found a spot, I worked fast. The tent went up in minutes, and I had a fire going as the last light disappeared. I sat close to the flames, trying to shake off the unease. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Close. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the trees. Nothing. I sat there, gripping the light so hard my hand hurt. I told myself it was just my nerves. I was alone. I had to be. But deep in the woods, just beyond the firelight, I heard breathing. Slow. Heavy. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just sat there listening. Then it stopped. I waited for what felt like hours, staring into the darkness. My fire crackled, the only sound in the night. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I crawled into my tent, keeping my knife within reach. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, ears straining for any sound. But nothing came. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the first light filtered through the trees, I packed up and left. I moved fast, barely stopping to eat or drink. I just wanted to get out, The feeling of being watched never left. Even when I reached my car, I could still feel it. Eyes in the trees, silence pressing down. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know who or what was following me. But I do know one thing. I'm never hiking alone again. I always liked hiking alone. Something about being deep in the woods, away from people, away from noise, away from everything always felt right. It was my way of resetting. I'd done it countless times without any problems. But this time was different. This time I made a mistake. And that mistake almost cost me my life. I had planned a solo hiking trip through a trail I had never been on before, somewhere deep in a national forest. The trail was said to be challenging but rewarding, leading up to a beautiful overlook. It was supposed to be a simple overnight trip, hike up, camp at the top, and hike back down in the morning. I had my backpack loaded with supplies, tent, sleeping bag, food, water, first aid kit, and a few other essentials. Everything was fine at first. The trail was steep and winding, with dense trees pressing in from both sides. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. The crunch of my boots on the dirt and the occasional rustling in the undergrowth were the only sounds. The first few miles were tiring but manageable. The sun was high, the weather was perfect, and I felt good. Then, somewhere around mile 6, I took a wrong turn. The trail had split in two, and I had been following the markers carefully up to that point. But somehow, I must have missed one. The new path didn't look too different from the one I had been on. Same packed dirt, same trees. I didn't even notice the mistake until an hour later when I realized the incline was steeper than it should have been. I checked my map. My GPS showed no signal. That wasn't unusual in these deep woods, but it still made me uneasy. I tried to backtrack, but the problem was everything looked the same. The trees, the rocks, even the way the ground sloped, it all blurred together. I couldn't tell where I had come from. That's when I first felt it, the sensation of being watched. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. It's easy to get paranoid when you're alone in the woods, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. I kept moving, faster now, heart pounding, scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Nothing but endless forest stretching in every direction. Then I saw it. A few yards off the path, partially hidden behind a tree, was something unnatural. A piece of fabric, torn and faded, tangled in the branches. It looked like part of a jacket. I moved closer. The material was stiff, weathered, and stained with something dark. Blood? Dirt? I wasn't sure. My gut told me to turn around, to get out of there, but I didn't know which way was out. I walked faster, trying to put distance between myself and whatever that was. But as I moved, something caught my eye, a clearing up ahead. I pushed forward, hoping to find a better view of my surroundings. The trees thinned, and I stepped into an open space. It wasn't a clearing. It was a campsite. At least it had been. There was a fire pit in the center, long burned out with charred logs around it. A backpack, torn open, lay near one of the logs, its contents scattered. A sleeping bag, half unzipped, was still there, dirt-covered, damp. And the worst part? A single boot, standing upright near the fire pit, its laces frayed. It looked like whoever had been here left in a hurry, or never left at all. My stomach twisted. I stepped forward carefully, scanning the ground. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, just abandonment. The tent was still there, collapsed, the poles snapped like something had pushed it down from above. That's when I noticed the silence. No birds, no wind, nothing. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just trees, tall, unmoving. I strained my ears, listening. Another sound, something soft, almost like breathing. I didn't wait. I grabbed my pack and bolted. I ran blindly, crashing through the undergrowth, ignoring the way branches whipped my arms. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept running. Then suddenly I was falling. The ground disappeared beneath me, My foot had caught on something, a root, a rock, I didn't know. All I knew was the feeling of weightlessness before I hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my ankle, and I gasped, struggling to get up. But when I looked down, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a root. It was a rope stretched across the path, tied between two trees, perfectly placed to trip someone running. I barely had time to process that before I heard movement. Fast, deliberate movement. Something was coming. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain, and limped forward as fast as I could. The adrenaline kept me going. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. But then, finally, I saw something that made me almost cry with relief. Tire tracks. A dirt road. Civilization. I stumbled onto the road just as a truck came around the bend. I waved my arms, shouting. The driver, a middle-aged man in a flannel, slowed down, his face twisted in confusion as he rolled down the window. "Jesus, you all right?" I didn't have words. I just climbed in, slammed the door, and locked it. The man drove me straight to the nearest ranger station. They sent a search team back to the area. They found the campsite. They found the tripwire. They even found more signs that someone or something had been out there, but they never found who set the trap. I haven't been hiking alone since. The air was crisp as I stepped out of my truck, the smell of damp earth and pine filling my lungs. It was early, the sun just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the dense forest ahead. This was the perfect day for a hike. No crowds, no distractions, just me and the trail. I had been planning this trip for weeks, researching routes, preparing supplies, and making sure I had everything I needed for a full day in the wilderness. My backpack was stocked with water, snacks, a first aid kit, and an extra jacket in case the weather turned. I had a map and a fully charged GPS. I was ready. The trailhead was empty, as I had expected this early in the morning. I locked my truck and set off, the dirt path winding through towering trees. The silence was peaceful, only interrupted by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant chirping of birds. I felt at ease, my mind clearing as I fell into a steady rhythm, boots crunching against the gravel. About an hour in, I reached a fork in the trail. To the right was the marked path, the one I had planned to take. To the left was an unmarked trail, narrower, less traveled. Something about it intrigued me. It wasn't on my map, but I had read about forgotten trails in this area, paths that had been used long ago but had faded over time. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to take the unmarked path. I had my GPS. If anything went wrong, I could always retrace my steps. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out most of the sunlight. The air felt different here, thicker, heavier. I pushed on, weaving through overgrown brush, my boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The trail was barely visible now, just a faint indentation in the ground. It was clear that few people had come this way in a long time. An uneasy feeling crept into my gut, but I ignored it. I had been hiking for years. I knew what I was doing. Still, something felt off. I stopped to check my GPS. No signal. That was strange. I had expected spotty reception, but my GPS should still be tracking my location. I pulled out my map, but without a clear point of reference, it wasn't much help. I turned around, deciding it was best to head back to the main trail. But as I walked, nothing looked familiar. The trees all looked the same, the path even fainter than before. I was sure I had come this way, yet everything felt different. I tried to stay calm. I wasn't lost. I just needed to backtrack carefully. An hour passed, then another. My surroundings weren't changing. I should have been back at the fork by now. My heart started to race. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to focus. I had extra supplies. I wasn't in immediate danger. I needed to think rationally. I decided to pick a direction and stick to it rather than wandering aimlessly. The sun was still visible through the gaps in the trees, and I knew which way I had come from, or at least I thought I did. But no matter how far I walked, I wasn't getting anywhere. Then I saw it. A boot print in the mud. My boot print. A cold wave of realization hit me. I had been walking in circles. Somehow, I had looped back to where I started. That wasn't possible. I had been moving in a straight line. Hadn't I? Panic threatened to take over, but I shoved it down. I needed a new plan. The best option now was to find a clearing, somewhere open where I could get my bearings. I pushed through thick underbrush, branches scratching my arms, my legs growing tired, and then I heard it, a sound, distant but distinct, something moving through the trees. It wasn't an animal. The footsteps were too deliberate, too steady. Someone was out here. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone. Maybe it was another hiker or a ranger. I called out, my voice cracking slightly from the hours of silence. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. The footsteps stopped. A shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't sure if I wanted an answer anymore. I stood frozen, listening, straining to hear anything over my own heartbeat. And then, just as suddenly as they had stopped, the footsteps started again. Closer. I turned and ran. I didn't think, I just moved. My body acted on instinct, weaving through trees, leaping over roots, my backpack bouncing against my back. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until the only sound was my own ragged breathing. When I finally stopped, I was somewhere new. A small clearing, the trees opening up just enough to let in more light. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. I turned, scanning the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Had I imagined it? Had I let fear get the best of me? I didn't know anymore, but I knew one thing. I had to get out of here before nightfall. I took a deep breath and pulled out my compass. It still worked. That was something. I oriented myself and chose a direction, this time sticking to it with absolute certainty. My pace was steady but urgent, my senses on high alert. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. And then, finally, I saw it. A break in the trees. The trailhead. I practically sprinted the last stretch, bursting out onto the dirt parking lot where my truck sat waiting. Relief crashed over me in a tidal wave. I stumbled toward my vehicle, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking as I unlocked the door and threw myself inside. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, my heart still hammering. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if anything or anyone was standing at the edge of the woods, watching. I started the engine and pulled out onto the road, leaving that place behind me. I never found that unmarked trail on any maps. No one I asked had heard of it, and I never went back. Some places aren't meant to be explored. I always thought of myself as an experienced hiker. I had done dozens of solo trips, navigated through rough terrain, and camped in places where no human had set foot for weeks. But this trip, the one I had planned to be just another weekend out in the wild, turned into something I could never have prepared for. I chose a trail deep in the Pacific Northwest, one of those lesser-known paths that only seasoned hikers talked about. It wasn't on any official maps, but I had read about it in an old hiking forum. A guy had written about this place, describing it as untouched, completely wild, and brutally isolated. That's what I was looking for. A place with no tourists, no crowds, just me and the wilderness. The hike started normally. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. The trail was rugged but manageable, winding through thick trees that stretched endlessly in all directions. I carried my pack with enough supplies for a 3-day trip. Food, a sleeping bag, a tent, a knife, a map, and my satellite phone, which I only turned on in emergencies. The first day went smoothly. I hiked deep into the woods, far away from any recognizable paths. I felt completely alone, which was exactly what I wanted. I set up my tent near a stream, built a small fire, and cooked a quick meal before turning in for the night. The forest was alive with the usual sounds, distant rustling, the occasional owl, and the constant hum of insects. I fell asleep easily, lulled by the sounds of nature. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something had changed. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Just dead, suffocating silence. I listened, waiting for any sound. Anything. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate crunch of leaves somewhere outside my tent. I stayed completely still, my breath caught in my throat. My mind raced. Could be an animal, maybe a deer or a bear. But something felt off. The steps were slow and methodical. Not like an animal foraging, more like something watching. I reached for my knife and waited. The steps circled my tent once, then twice. I held my breath, gripping my knife so tightly my hand ached. Then the sound stopped. Whatever it was, it had left. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As soon as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I packed up and moved. I wasn't about to stay in the same place after that. Maybe it was a curious animal, but I wasn't taking any chances. I hiked for miles, pushing deeper into the wilderness, trying to put as much distance as I could between myself and whatever had been out there the night before. By the time I stopped to rest, I was exhausted. The sun had started to set again, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. I set up my camp in a small clearing. The night felt less tense than before, though I still felt on edge. Again, in the middle of the night, I woke up. And again, the forest was completely silent. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. And then I heard it again, the same slow, deliberate footsteps. But this time, they were closer. I grabbed my knife and flashlight and unzipped my tent just an inch, peering out into the darkness. I shined my light into the trees, scanning for movement. Nothing. But then, just beyond the reach of my flashlight, I saw it. A figure standing completely still. I froze. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't another hiker. It was just standing there, barely visible through the trees, watching. I slammed my tent shut, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to run blindly into the dark, but I also wasn't going to sit there and wait for whatever that was to come closer. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure moved. It stepped back into the darkness, disappearing completely. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As soon as dawn came, I packed up and hiked as fast as I could. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't stop to rest. I just kept moving. But something was wrong. The trees looked different. The landscape didn't match my map. I had been hiking for hours, but nothing was familiar. It was as if the forest itself had changed. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun wildly before settling in the wrong direction. I was completely turned around. I kept walking, trying to find a way back to my original route, but the deeper I went, the worse it got. The trees grew denser. The air felt thick, suffocating. I had the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. And then, just when panic was starting to set in, I found something. Clearing. At first, I felt relief. Open space meant I could get my bearings. But then I saw what was in the middle of it. A cabin. It was old, rotting, the wood darkened with age. There were no signs of life, no smoke, no footprints. But it looked wrong, like it didn't belong there, like it had been abandoned for decades. I had a choice. Stay outside in the open or go inside and hope for shelter. I chose the cabin. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust. The walls were covered in scratches, deep, jagged marks that looked like they had been made by something desperate. A table sat in the center of the room, and on it, a single old journal. I flipped it open. The pages were filled with scrawled handwriting. A hiker lost just like me. He had written about the same sounds, the same footsteps, the same figure watching him. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. If you're reading this, leave. Now, don't sleep. Don't stop. Just run. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, crashing through branches, tearing through the underbrush, ignoring the cuts on my arms and legs. I didn't stop. Not until I saw something that made my knees go weak. A road. A real paved road. Civilization. Safety. I stumbled onto it, breathless and shaking. A passing car stopped, and the driver looked at me like I was a madman. I must have looked like one. I didn't care. I had made it out. I never went back. I never even tried to find that trail again. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I still hear it. The slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps. And I wonder if whatever was out there ever really stopped watching. I remember the morning clearly. The air was crisp, and the sky was a perfect shade of blue. I had planned this solo hiking trip for months, eager to push myself and test my endurance on the rugged trails deep in the mountains. I packed light but smart, plenty of water, protein bars, a small first aid kit, and my trusty knife. The map I carried was dog-eared from all the times I had traced the route with my fingers, memorizing each turn and elevation change. I was confident in my ability to handle the wilderness. The first few miles were beautiful. Towering pines lined the narrow dirt trail, their needles carpeting the ground in a soft, fragrant layer. Birds chirped somewhere above, unseen but loud. The wind whispered through the trees, making the whole forest feel alive. The air was clean, untouched by the smell of cars or city fumes. I moved at a steady pace, my boots crunching over twigs and loose stones, my backpack resting comfortably on my shoulders. I had done hikes like this before, and I felt completely at ease. About 6 miles in, I reached the first major checkpoint, a rocky outcrop with a breathtaking view of the valley below. I paused to catch my breath, stretching my legs and taking a sip of water. The landscape stretched out before me, a vast expanse of green with a river snaking through it like a silver ribbon. It was moments like this that made me love hiking. I checked my watch, still on schedule. I planned to reach my campsite near the peak by late afternoon, giving me plenty of time to set up before dark. The trail ahead was more challenging, with steep inclines and uneven ground, but I was prepared. As I continued hiking, the forest began to change. The trees grew denser, their branches tangled overhead, blocking out more of the sky. The sounds of birds grew fainter, replaced by a strange stillness. It wasn't sudden, but gradual, like the world was slowly pressing in around me. The air seemed heavier, thicker. I brushed it off as exhaustion and kept moving. About 3 hours later, I reached an unfamiliar section of the trail. According to my map, I should have been nearing a fork that would take me toward the peak, but instead, I found myself on a narrow path that seemed less traveled. The dirt was damp, and the undergrowth on either side was thick, as if nature had been trying to reclaim it. I stopped, pulling out my map and compass, double-checking my location. I should have been on the right track, but something felt off. I couldn't see any signs of the well-worn trail I had been following. The trees here were different, older, their trunks twisted, their bark rough and peeling. The wind had died completely. The silence was absolute, unnatural. I shook off the unease and decided to backtrack. If I had taken a wrong turn, I would find my mistake soon enough. I turned around, scanning the trees for familiar landmarks, but everything looked the same. A slow, creeping sensation of dread began to settle in my stomach. I walked for nearly 30 minutes, expecting to find my last checkpoint, the rocky outcrop, but it never appeared. Instead, I was met with more unfamiliar terrain. My breathing grew heavier, not from exertion, but from something else. I was lost. I forced myself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course, I had expected that, but I still felt a sinking feeling in my chest seeing the no service icon staring back at me. I took a deep breath and tried to think. If I was lost, I needed to retrace my steps carefully. I looked at my compass. North. I had been heading north before, so if I turned south, I should, in theory, reach the main trail again. I started walking. An hour passed, then another. The forest never changed. The same thick undergrowth, the same twisted trees, the same oppressive silence. It was as if I had been walking in place. The rational part of my brain told me that wasn't possible, but my gut told me something was very, very wrong. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the ground. I needed to stop and set up camp. I couldn't afford to wander aimlessly in the dark. I found a small clearing, barely large enough to fit my tent. I gathered some dry wood and managed to get a small fire going. The warmth was comforting, but the firelight only seemed to deepen the shadows beyond its reach. I ate a protein bar, forcing myself to chew slowly to stay focused. Then I heard it, a sound, faint but distinct. Footsteps. They were distant but steady, crunching softly through the undergrowth. I froze, my body tensing. The sound stopped. I strained my ears. Nothing, just the crackling of the fire. I told myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe, a fox, but my gut said otherwise. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, my knife gripped tightly in my hand, my ears straining for any sound. The night dragged on, the darkness pressing in. Every rustle, every whisper of wind set my nerves on edge. When morning finally came, I packed up quickly. I needed to move. Staying in one place wouldn't help. I walked for hours. My legs ached. My throat was dry, but I didn't stop. I just needed to find the main trail. I kept telling myself that, repeating it over and over like a mantra. Then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. My own footprints. From yesterday. I was back at the same clearing where I had spent the night. I felt sick. My head spun. I knew I had been walking in a straight line. I had followed my compass. This wasn't possible. The dread that had been slowly creeping in now fully sank its claws into me. Something was wrong with this forest. I wasn't just lost, I was trapped. Panic clawed at my throat, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't afford to lose my head. I forced myself to think. I needed a new plan. If following my compass led me in circles, I had to try something else. I decided to climb. If I could find higher ground, I might be able to see where I had gone wrong. I found a steep ridge and began to climb. My muscles burned, but I pushed on. When I reached the top, I turned, expecting to see the valley, the river, some sign of civilization. I saw nothing but endless trees. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the expanse of forest that stretched endlessly in every direction. My legs felt weak. Then movement. At the edge of my vision, deep in the trees, something moved. I didn't see what it was, just a flicker of motion, something large, something watching. I turned and ran. I don't remember how long I ran. My body was running on pure adrenaline, my mind screaming at me to keep moving. I tripped, fell, scraped my hands, got back up. I ran until my lungs burned, until my vision blurred. Then I saw it. A road, a real paved road cutting through the trees. I stumbled toward it, barely believing my own eyes. My knees gave out and I collapsed onto the asphalt. Hours later, a car came. A couple stopped, helped me into the back seat, asked me where I had come from. I couldn't answer. I just sat there, staring out the window, watching the trees disappear behind me. I haven't been hiking since. I don't know what it was exactly that made me decide to do this hike alone. Maybe it was the stress at work, or maybe it was just the need to prove something to myself. Either way, I found myself on a trail deep in the mountains, miles away from anyone. The plan was simple: hike up, camp overnight, and head back down in the morning. The first few miles were easy enough. The air was crisp, the sky was clear, and the sound of birds filled the silence. My pack was heavy, but nothing I couldn't handle. The dirt path twisted through dense trees, breaking every now and then to reveal breathtaking views of the valleys below. I stopped to take pictures, trying to capture the moment, but pictures never do justice to the real thing. After a few hours, I reached a fork in the trail. The left path was the one I had mapped out, well-traveled and leading to the spot I planned to set up camp. But the right path caught my eye. It was narrower, looked less used, and something about it just seemed interesting. I figured I had enough daylight left to explore for a bit, then double back if it led nowhere. At first, it felt like any other part of the hike. The trees pressed in a little closer, the ground was uneven, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. Then I started noticing little things. The silence, for one. The birds had stopped singing. The wind barely moved through the trees. Even my footsteps sounded muffled. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off. Then I saw the first sign that something wasn't right. A boot, half buried in the dirt, old and weathered. I paused, looking around, but there was no sign of anyone else. Just trees and silence. Maybe someone had dropped it years ago. I kept moving. The further I went, the worse the trail got. It became steeper, rockier, and harder to follow. I had to use my hands to steady myself more than once. Then I found the second thing. A backpack, torn open, with its contents scattered. It looked old, like it had been there for years. I knelt down, brushing away leaves. Water bottles, granola bar wrappers, a flashlight, all rusted and useless. There was no sign of who it had belonged to. I should have turned around then. Something in my gut told me to, but I didn't. Instead, I pushed forward, convincing myself that curiosity was harmless. The sun was getting lower, and I knew I had to find a spot to camp soon. The trail had faded almost entirely now, but I saw an opening ahead. When I reached it, I realized it wasn't a clearing. It was the edge of a steep drop-off. Below, I saw the remains of an old campsite, tents ripped and sagging, gear scattered. Everything looked untouched for years. My skin prickled. I had heard stories of lost hikers, but seeing this made my stomach turn. I scanned the area, looking for anything that explained what happened, but there was nothing, just silence and decay. I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. Not an animal, not the wind, a sound I couldn't place, like fabric shifting, like someone moving just beyond my sight. My heart pounded. I stayed still, listening. Nothing, just my own breathing, too loud in the quiet. I took a slow step back, then another. Every instinct screamed at me to go. I don't remember running, but suddenly I was moving, crashing through the brush, back the way I came. The trees blurred, the air felt heavier, and every shadow felt like something watching. I lost the trail. I knew it almost instantly. The sun was lower now, turning everything orange and gold. I forced myself to stop, to breathe. Panicking would make it worse. I pulled out my map, but I had no idea where I was anymore. I checked my compass south. That was the direction I needed. I pushed forward, forcing myself to move steadily. Minutes passed, then an hour. The trees stretched endlessly, all looking the same. My legs ached, and my throat was dry. Then finally I saw it, the fork in the trail. Relief flooded me as I stepped onto the familiar path. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked fast, then faster until I saw the parking lot through the trees. My car was still there, waiting like a lifeline. I threw my pack in, got in, and locked the doors. Only then did I let myself breathe. I never found out what happened at that old campsite. I never went back to check. But sometimes, when I hike alone, I think about it. About the silence, about the feeling that I wasn't alone. And I wonder who else had walked that trail before me, and why didn't they make it back? I had been planning this solo hike for months. It was something I had wanted to do for a long time. Just me, the trail, and miles of untouched wilderness. The route was a remote one, deep in the mountains, far from the usual crowded paths. It would take 3 days to complete, and I had packed everything carefully. My tent, sleeping bag, enough food and water, a map, and a satellite GPS just in case. I told a few people where I was going, but I wasn't worried. I had done hikes like this before. The first day was perfect. The weather was clear, and the trail was exactly what I had hoped for. Steep climbs, thick forests, and quiet. I didn't see another person the entire time, just the occasional sign of wildlife. A deer darting through the trees, birds rustling in the branches above, a fresh bear track in the mud near a stream. I made camp before sundown, built a small fire, ate my food, and fell asleep to the sounds of the wind moving through the trees. The second day, things started to feel different. The air had a strange stillness to it. The forest felt too quiet, like something had pressed a mute button on the world. I figured it was just my imagination. I had been alone for over 24 hours after all, and the mind plays tricks in isolation. But then, as I walked, I began noticing small things that didn't make sense. The first was a boot print in the mud. It was old, probably a few days, but it didn't match mine. It was large, deep, and off the main trail, like someone had been walking through the underbrush instead of following the marked path. I paused, staring at it for a long time. There was no reason for someone to be that far off trail unless they were lost or hiding. I shook off the thought and kept going. A few miles later, I found something worse. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. It was dark, almost black, but when I held it up to the light, I saw it had once been red. The edges were frayed like it had been ripped, not cut. I looked around, suddenly feeling exposed. There was nothing but trees in every direction. Still, I picked up my pace. That night, I didn't make a fire. I set up my tent and crawled inside as soon as the sun dipped below the trees. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening. There was nothing at first. No wind, no rustling leaves, no animals. Just silence. And then, sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching on the dry leaves just outside my tent. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid it would give me away. I reached for my knife, gripping it tightly. The steps stopped. A long pause. Then they moved again, circling my tent. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They took their time, each step measured, unafraid. I stayed like that until the first light of dawn, knife in hand, barely breathing. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped outside, there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I had heard. I wanted to turn back, but I was closer to the end of the trail than the start. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it had been an animal, or maybe I had imagined it in that half-sleep state where dreams and reality blur. So I kept going. By midday, I found something that made me stop cold. A camp, or at least what had once been a camp. The remains of a fire pit, a few empty cans, a shredded sleeping bag. It had been there for days, maybe weeks, but what unsettled me most was the way it had been left. It wasn't abandoned in a normal way. It was wrecked. The sleeping bag was torn open down the middle, the cans crushed flat like someone had stomped on them. And the fire pit? It was scattered, as if someone had kicked it apart in a hurry. I felt a deep unease settle in my stomach. Something had happened here, something bad. I turned away and moved faster, almost running down the trail. I was still hours from the end, but I needed to get out of these woods. Then the smell hit me. It was faint at first, just a hint of rot on the wind. But as I moved, it grew stronger. I didn't want to follow it, but I didn't have a choice. The trail curved, and the wind carried the stench straight at me. And then I saw it, a deer, or what was left of one. It was lying just off the trail, its body twisted, its stomach torn open. But what made my skin crawl wasn't the fact that it was dead. It was how it had died. Its legs were broken at odd angles, like they had been snapped. Not chewed, not clawed, snapped. Something wasn't right. I kept moving faster now. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop. The trees blurred past, and every shadow felt like it was watching me. The feeling of being followed was overwhelming. I kept glancing back, but I never saw anything. Just the trees, just the empty trail. But I knew, deep in my gut, that I wasn't alone. I reached the end of the trail just as the sun started to set. My car was there, just as I had left it. I threw my gear inside, locked the doors, and sat there, breathing hard. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. When I finally started the car and pulled onto the road, I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was miles away from those woods. I don't know what was out there. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I let the isolation get to me. But something was wrong in those woods. Something had been watching me. Something had been following me. And whatever it wasn't human. I haven't been back since. I had planned the hike for weeks. It was supposed to be a solo weekend trip through the mountains, just me and the trail. No distractions, no noise, just nature and the rhythm of my own footsteps. I packed everything I needed: food, a tent, a sleeping bag, extra clothes, a water filter, a good knife, and my map. I wasn't an amateur. I had done this before plenty of times, but this time would be different. The trail wasn't popular, which was part of the appeal. No crowds, no overused campsites, just a path winding through thick forests and steep ridges. It was about 20 miles from the trailhead to the peak and another 20 back. A solid weekend trek. The first day went smoothly. The weather was perfect: cool air, clear sky. I made good time, covering nearly 12 miles before setting up camp near a small stream. The silence out there was peaceful. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird overhead. I made a small fire, ate my dinner, and lay back, staring at the stars through the gaps in the tree canopy. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound. Not an animal, not wind, something deliberate. A soft crunch of leaves, like a footstep. I held my breath, listening. The sound didn't come again. I figured it was just my imagination or a deer wandering nearby. I turned over and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I packed up and got back on the trail. The climb got tougher, the incline steeper. My legs burned as I pushed forward, but I enjoyed the challenge. Around midday, I reached a clearing with a view stretching miles in every direction. Rolling hills, dense forests, and no sign of human civilization. It was exactly what I wanted. That's when I noticed something strange. Down in the valley below, a flicker of movement. I squinted. It was a person, a lone figure moving through the trees, far off the trail. They weren't carrying a backpack, just walking. At that distance, it was hard to tell much more. It didn't make sense. There were no other trails nearby, no roads, no campgrounds. They shouldn't be there. I watched for a while, but they disappeared into the trees. Probably nothing, I told myself. Maybe a hunter or someone who got turned around. I moved on. By late afternoon, I reached the highest ridge before the final push to the summit. That's when I saw it: footprints. Fresh ones. But they weren't hiking boot prints. They were bare feet. The dirt was soft, and the prints were clear, leading off the trail into the woods. My stomach twisted. Who the hell hikes up a mountain barefoot? I didn't follow them. Instead, I picked up my pace, wanting to reach my next campsite before dark. The feeling of isolation, once comforting, now felt different, like I wasn't alone. That night, I set up camp near a cluster of boulders that offered some protection from the wind. I kept my fire small and stayed alert, my knife within arm's reach. The night was quiet, too quiet. No insects, no rustling leaves, just stillness. I lay awake for hours, every little sound making my heart pound. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. I woke up to the feeling of being watched. I don't know how I knew, but I did. My skin prickled. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Then a soft sound, a shift of weight on the ground, just outside my tent. Not an animal, person. I slowly reached for my knife, my fingers closing around the handle. My pulse pounded in my ears. I listened. The sound moved, slow, deliberate steps circling my tent. I didn't move. My brain screamed at me to do something, but I stayed frozen. The footsteps stopped. Minutes passed. Then, finally, they moved away, fading into the forest. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping my knife, my muscles locked in tension. As soon as there was enough light, I unzipped my tent and stepped out. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of anything. But I knew what I heard. I wasn't imagining it. I made a decision. I was getting the hell out of there. The summit didn't matter anymore. I packed up faster than I ever had and started back down the trail at a brutal pace, pushing my legs to move faster than they wanted to. Every rustle in the trees made me whip my head around, but I saw nothing. About halfway down, I saw something ahead on the trail. My breath caught. Another set of footprints, bare feet, and they weren't mine. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep moving. The prints continued for a while, then veered off into the woods. I didn't follow them. I didn't want to know. I made it back to my first campsite by early afternoon. I debated stopping, resting, but my gut screamed at me to keep going. The feeling of being watched never left me. I pushed forward, my legs aching, my mind racing. The sun was setting by the time I reached the final stretch of trail leading back to my car. Relief surged through me when I saw it, parked exactly where I left it. I jogged the last 100 yards, my body screaming from exhaustion, and yanked the door open. I threw my pack in the passenger seat, started the engine, and peeled out of there, not looking back. I don't know what I encountered out there. Maybe a drifter, maybe something worse. But I do know one thing, I'm never going back to that trail. It started as a simple plan, a solo trip into the backcountry, something I had done before. I wasn't some amateur. I had experience with long hikes, understood survival skills, and had all the gear I needed. The plan was to hike deep into the mountains, away from the usual trails, camp overnight, and make my way back the next day. I wanted solitude, a break from the noise of life. But what I got was something I will never forget. The weather was perfect when I started. The sun was high, but the air was crisp. I had checked the forecast, and there was no sign of rain. My pack was heavy but manageable: tent, food, water, knife, first aid kit, and a few other essentials. I had mapped out a rough path, something off the main trail but not too extreme. The idea was to reach a remote ridge that had a beautiful, untouched view of the valley below. The first few hours were peaceful. The sound of my boots crunching on dirt, the occasional chirp of birds, the rustling of leaves, felt good. The farther I went, the less sign there was of other people. No more boot prints, no more worn-down trails. It was just me and the wilderness. I saw a deer at one point, standing motionless in the trees, staring at me before vanishing into the shadows. I took it as a good sign. By midday, I had covered a lot of ground. I stopped by a stream to refill my water bottle and eat a quick meal. The water was ice cold and fresh, straight from the mountains. I took my time, enjoying the silence. But as I packed up and got ready to move on, I noticed something strange. There was an old, almost overgrown trail leading away from the stream, one that wasn't on any map I had seen. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. I felt a strange pull toward it. Curiosity, I told myself. I had the time and I had my GPS, so I decided to follow it. At first, the trail was easy enough to walk. The trees were thick, their branches forming a tunnel of green above me. It was darker here, cooler, but as I walked, something began to feel off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the silence had changed. The birds were gone. The wind had died. All I could hear was my own footsteps, and for some reason that made me uneasy. I should have turned back, but I didn't. The deeper I went, the worse it got. The trail became narrower, the ground uneven. I had to push branches out of my way, step over fallen logs, and then I saw something that stopped me cold. A boot, an old, rotting boot, half buried in the dirt. It looked like it had been there for years, weathered by rain and sun. My first thought was that someone had lost it, but then I saw another, and another. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt. The leather was cracked, the sole peeling away. But it wasn't just boots. I saw pieces of fabric, straps, rusted buckles, a broken backpack, torn apart as if something had ripped through it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had been here, and they hadn't left. I stood up, my heart pounding. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but my legs refused to move. My eyes scanned the trees, searching for something, anything that would explain this. But there was nothing, just the empty woods and the eerie silence. I took a slow step back, and that's when I heard it. A sound, not an animal, not the wind. It was something deliberate. A footstep, soft, almost careful, not far away. I turned, scanning the trees, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. I saw nothing, but I knew I was not alone. I moved quickly, forcing myself to stay calm. I retraced my steps, heading back toward the stream. The trail felt longer now, darker. The silence pressed down on me. Every time I stopped, I heard it. Soft steps, following me. I didn't run. Running in the woods is dangerous. One wrong step, one twisted ankle, and I'd be helpless. So I walked fast, controlled. My heart hammered in my chest. My hand tightened around my knife, but I knew that if something was out there, a small blade wouldn't do much. Took me nearly an hour to reach the stream again. When I did, I didn't stop. I pushed forward, back toward the main trail. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the feeling was gone. The birds returned. The wind picked up. The forest felt normal again. I didn't look back. I walked until my legs ached, until I reached a familiar part of the trail. I set up camp before dark, my hands shaking as I pitched my tent. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt wrong. I barely slept. When dawn came, I packed up and left without eating. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I locked the doors the moment I got inside and drove away, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I don't know what happened out there. I don't know who left those boots or why I felt watched. But I do know one thing. I will never hike alone again. I always thought I knew my limits. I had hiked dozens of trails, some of them difficult, some of them long, but I had never once felt afraid in the wilderness. That changed on the trip that nearly ended me. It started as a solo weekend hike through a dense forest in Montana, about 60 miles from the nearest town. I had picked this particular trail because it was remote, rugged, and had a reputation for being one of the most challenging routes in the area. It was an old logging road that had long since faded back into nature, barely visible on most maps. There was something about the solitude of it that appealed to me. I wanted to test myself, to see if I could make it through the rough terrain with nothing but my pack and my instincts. I planned to hike in about 15 miles, set up camp for the night, and then push deeper the next morning before looping back. The first few hours were peaceful. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional crack of branches under my boots. I followed the barely there path, relying more on my GPS than any visible trail markers. The deeper I went, the more the trees pressed in around me, towering pines and thick undergrowth swallowing any trace of civilization. At around the 8-mile mark, I noticed something odd. The forest had gone quiet. The birds were gone. The wind had stopped. It was the kind of silence that makes you stop walking just to make sure you haven't gone deaf. A deep unease settled into my stomach, but I shook it off. Sometimes nature just did that. Maybe a predator was nearby, something big enough to make the smaller creatures go still. I kept moving, but the feeling stayed with me. The trees seemed taller here, the shadows darker. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I picked up my pace anyway. By the time I hit my planned stopping point, the sun was getting low in the sky. I found a relatively flat clearing, surrounded on 3 sides by thick trees and on the 4th by a small stream. It seemed as good a place as any to set up camp. I pitched my tent quickly, made a small fire, and ate a protein bar while watching the last of the daylight fade. The unease hadn't left me, but I forced myself to relax. I had camped alone plenty of times. There was no reason this trip should feel any different. But as the night wore on, the silence remained, broken only by the occasional snap of twigs in the distance. I told myself it was just the natural sounds of the forest, but deep down, I didn't believe it. I tried to sleep but kept waking up every hour. Each time I drifted off, some small noise would jolt me awake. A branch breaking, leaves rustling, something shifting in the darkness beyond my tent. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I finally fell into something resembling real sleep. That was when I had the dream. It wasn't a normal dream. It felt like I was awake, lying in my tent, unable to move. The flap was open, and I could see outside. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across the clearing. And standing just at the edge of the light, almost too far to make out, was a figure. I couldn't see its face. It was just a dark outline, unmoving, watching. I wanted to reach for my flashlight, to grab my knife, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. The fear in my chest was suffocating. I could feel my heart pounding, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. And then the figure took a step forward. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My tent flap was closed, just as I had left it. My knife was still beside me. The fire had burned out completely, leaving only cold ashes. It was just a dream, I told myself, but it didn't feel like one. I packed up my gear before the sun even rose. I had planned to push farther in, but something in my gut told me to turn back. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones even when you're moving. I kept my head down and focused on retracing my steps, but the feeling of being watched never left me. At around the 6-mile mark on my way out, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. A footprint, not mine. It was fresh, pressed deep into the damp earth. It was larger than my own boot print and bare. No shoes, just a human foot. I stared at it for a long time, my brain struggling to process it. I wasn't alone out here. I forced myself to keep moving. My pace quickened, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every snapped twig, every shift in the trees made me jump. I told myself it was nothing, just paranoia, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, at the 2-mile mark, I saw it. Hanging from a tree just off the trail, swaying gently in the breeze, was a deer carcass. Its body had been stripped of skin, the raw flesh exposed to the open air. The head was missing. The cuts were too clean to be from an animal. This had been done by a person. Panic took over then. I ran. I didn't care about staying quiet, didn't care about pacing myself. I just ran. The forest blurred around me, the trees a twisting mess of green and brown. My pack bounced against my back. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop until I saw my car. I threw my pack in the back, yanked the door open, and locked it as soon as I was inside. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there, gravel spraying beneath my tires. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main road. Only then did I pull over, my entire body still trembling. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty road ahead, trying to process what had just happened. There was no logical explanation. I don't know who or what was out there, but I do know one thing: I will never go back. That trail isn't on most maps, and it should stay that way. I had been planning this solo hiking trip for months. The trail, deep in the northern wilderness, was remote but well documented. It promised breathtaking views, quiet solitude, and a challenge. Exactly what I needed. I had done my research, packed my gear carefully, and made sure to bring enough food, water, and emergency supplies. I wasn't new to hiking. I had done several multi-day treks before, so I felt confident. But I also knew that nature didn't care about confidence. I arrived at the trailhead early in the morning. The air was crisp, and the forest smelled of damp earth and pine. I secured my pack, checked my map, and set off. The first few hours were perfect. The trail was rugged but manageable, winding through dense trees with occasional openings that offered views of the valley below. The silence was deep, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or a bird call. I welcomed the isolation. It was why I was here. By midday, I had covered several miles and stopped to eat. I sat on a fallen log, drinking water and listening to the wind move through the trees. That was when I noticed something strange. A deep groove in the dirt, like something had been dragged along the trail. It wasn't from a person. I could tell by the depth and the way the soil had been disturbed. It looked too wide, too heavy. Maybe an animal had killed something and pulled it through? That wasn't unheard of. I brushed it off and continued. The trail grew more challenging. The terrain became uneven, and the incline steeper. I moved carefully, keeping an eye on my footing. By late afternoon, I reached the spot I had planned to camp, a small clearing near a stream. It was perfect. I set up my tent, made a fire, and ate a small meal. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest became even quieter. It wasn't eerie, just still. I had camped alone before, but this silence felt different, like something was listening, watching. That night, I slept lightly. Every small sound made me stir. At one point, I heard something move outside my tent, not the usual scurrying of a small animal. This was deliberate, slow. I held my breath, listening. Then silence. Minutes passed, maybe more, before I forced myself to relax. Probably just my mind playing tricks on me. Eventually, I drifted off. The next morning, I stepped outside my tent and immediately noticed something was wrong. My gear had been disturbed. My pack was a few feet from where I had left it, straps undone. My water bottle was missing. I looked around, searching for signs of an animal, but there were no claw marks, no bite marks, nothing. Just my things moved. That feeling of being watched from the night before came rushing back. Someone had been here. I packed quickly, my nerves buzzing. I wasn't turning back, but I wasn't going to ignore what happened, either. I stayed alert, moving faster than I had the day before. The trail was harder now, narrower, more overgrown. My map showed that I had another full day before I reached the next marked campsite. I kept moving. Hours passed. The forest seemed darker, the trees pressing closer. I kept checking my surroundings, my gut telling me I wasn't alone. Then I saw it, another disturbance in the dirt ahead. The same kind of drag marks as before, only this time they were fresher. I stopped, scanning the area. The forest around me was thick, making it impossible to see far. Every shadow looked like it could be hiding something. I considered turning back, but I had come too far. I pressed on, walking faster, my senses on high alert. The wind had picked up, making the trees creak. Every sound felt sharper, closer. I kept my knife in my hand, just in case. As the day wore on, I came across something that made my stomach drop. A piece of fabric, snagged on a branch. It looked like part of a jacket, faded and torn. Picked it up, my heart pounding. This wasn't old. The fabric was still strong, not weathered by time. Someone had come through here recently, but why had they left part of their clothing behind? I forced myself to keep going. By the time I reached a relatively open area, the sun was setting. I didn't want to camp here, but I had no choice. I set up as quickly as I could, keeping my fire high. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I knew something was out there. That night was worse than the last. I barely slept, every nerve in my body on edge. Then, in the early hours of the morning, I heard it again. Footsteps. Close. Too close. I grabbed my knife and flashlight, my hand shaking as I unzipped the tent just enough to see outside. The fire had burned low, casting weak light around the clearing. The trees beyond were dark, impenetrable, but I saw movement, a shape just at the edge of the light. Tall, human. I froze. The figure didn't move closer. It just stood there, watching. I couldn't see a face, couldn't make out any details. Just the silhouette of a person. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that was the worst thing I could do. Instead, I stayed still, gripping my knife. Then, slowly, the figure stepped back into the darkness. Gone. I didn't sleep after that. The moment the sky lightened, I packed up and left. I moved fast, nearly running at some points. The forest felt like it was closing in, like something was pushing me out. I didn't stop, didn't look back. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there, my hands gripping the wheel, my whole body shaking. I don't know who or what was out there. Maybe it was just another hiker. Maybe it was someone who lived off the grid, who didn't want to be found. Or maybe it was something worse. I'll never know. But I do know this, I won't be going back. I had been planning this hike for months. It was supposed to be a solo trip, 3 days deep in the mountains, completely alone, away from the noise of the city. I had everything I needed: a solid backpack, good boots, a tent, and enough supplies to last the trip. The trail was tough but not impossible. A remote loop through dense forest, over rocky ridges, and past old, abandoned fire lookout towers. The first day was perfect. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and my legs felt strong. The trailhead was nearly empty, just one car parked near mine. I liked that. I wasn't out here to run into people. The first few miles climbed steadily, switchback after switchback, up a steep ridge. I was sweating, but I felt good. At the top, I had my first real view of the vast wilderness ahead of me. Rolling green hills stretching for miles, untouched and endless. By late afternoon, I had covered about 10 miles. I set up camp in a small clearing near a stream, cooked a quick meal, and sat by my tent, listening to the sounds of the forest. Birds, the rustling of leaves, the occasional snap of a branch in the distance. Normal sounds, but that night something felt off. I woke up sometime after midnight. I don't know why. The forest was dead silent. No wind, no insects, just stillness. I lay there, listening, my ears straining for any sound. Then, somewhere far off, I heard something move. A single, heavy footstep. Then another. Slow, deliberate. Not a deer, not a bear. Something walking. It stopped. I held my breath, heart pounding. Then it moved again, away from my camp, deeper into the woods. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe just my imagination. Maybe an animal stepping through the underbrush in a weird way. I packed up and moved on. The second day's hike was harder, steeper, with long sections of loose rock and narrow trails that hugged the side of cliffs. Around noon, I stopped for a break near an old fire lookout tower. The structure was barely standing, just a skeleton of rusted metal and rotting wood. I climbed up a little, just enough to get a view. Miles of empty forest in every direction. No roads, no signs of civilization, just wilderness. That's when I saw it. Far below, near the treeline, something was moving. At first, I thought it was an animal, but it was too tall, too upright. It was a person, but they weren't on any trail. They were just moving through the trees in a straight line. Not hiking, just walking. I watched for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it. No backpack, no gear. Just a lone figure moving through the wilderness with no clear direction. Eventually, they disappeared into the trees. I tried to shake it off, but the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who the hell hikes like that? Where were they going? I hiked faster than I planned, pushing myself hard. I wanted to put distance between me and wherever that person had been. By evening, I was exhausted. I found a good camping spot, a little hidden, surrounded by thick trees. I didn't want to be seen. I cooked, ate, and forced myself to relax. That night, I woke up again. The forest was silent. Then, just outside my tent, a sound, a footstep, slow, careful. Another. I held my breath, frozen. My mind raced. An animal? Person? Someone else hiking? Then breathing, just outside my tent. Low, controlled. Not panting, not sniffing, just breathing. I reached for my knife, barely daring to move. The breathing stayed for what felt like forever. Then slowly it faded. Footsteps moving away. Then nothing, just silence. I didn't sleep after that. I waited until the sky started turning gray, packed my gear in record time, and got moving. I hiked fast. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't stop to rest. I just moved. By midday, I reached a section of trail that followed a ridgeline. On one side, a sheer drop. On the other, a steep, forested slope. That's when I saw them again. Far below, on the slope, the same figure, walking. But this time, they stopped. And they turned. They were looking up. At me. I couldn't see their face. Too far. But they stood there, completely still. Watching. I turned and kept walking, my pace nearly a jog. I didn't look back. By late afternoon, I was near the end of the loop, just a few more miles. I was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline. I had this sick feeling in my gut, like I was being hunted. Then, ahead on the trail, footprints, fresh, going the same direction I was. I stopped, heart hammering. Who? No one should have been ahead of me. I hadn't passed anyone. Then, from the trees to my right, a sound. A footstep. Close. I bolted. Full sprint. Branches whipped at my face. My pack slammed against my back. I didn't care. I just ran. I didn't stop until I saw the parking lot. My car, and another car, the same one I had seen when I arrived. And standing next to it, someone, just standing, watching. I didn't slow down. I ran straight to my car, threw my gear inside, locked the doors, and tore out of there so fast my tires kicked up gravel. As I pulled onto the main road, I looked in my rearview mirror. The person was still there, still watching. I never went back. I had always been the type to enjoy the solitude of hiking alone. There was something about being deep in the wilderness, away from the noise of the world, that made me feel alive. That's why, when I found an old, unmarked trail in the mountains near my home, I didn't hesitate to take it. It wasn't on any map I had seen, but the path was clear, narrow, winding, but definitely used by someone at some point. I figured it was just an old logging trail, forgotten over time. The first few hours were peaceful. The air was crisp, the scent of damp earth and pine filling my lungs. Birds chirped somewhere above, and the distant sound of a stream reminded me how far I had come. I felt good, alive, like I had found a place no one else had stepped foot in for years. I stopped to take a few pictures, marking my progress, and then kept going. Then the atmosphere started to shift. It was subtle at first. The birds had stopped singing. The wind that had been rustling through the trees died down, leaving nothing but the sound of my own footsteps. I paused, listening. The forest felt off, like it was waiting, watching. I shook it off, just my mind playing tricks on me. The deeper you go into the wilderness, the quieter it gets sometimes. No big deal. But then I noticed something else. The trail, which had been clear just moments ago, was starting to fade. The dirt path was being swallowed up by the undergrowth. I could still make it out if I looked closely, but it was getting harder to follow. That was strange. Had I really come that far in just a few hours? Trails don't just disappear like that. I decided to turn back. I had gotten what I came for, a good hike, a sense of adventure. But as I turned, something didn't sit right. The way back didn't look like the way I had come. I was sure I had followed a mostly straight path, but now everything looked different. The trees, the rocks, the way the light filtered through the canopy. It all felt unfamiliar. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS. No service. Not surprising, but still unsettling. I had a compass and a map in my pack, but when I unfolded the map, I realized how little it helped. This trail wasn't marked anywhere. No landmarks, no references. Just a path that had somehow led me deeper than I had intended. I tried to stay calm. Panic doesn't help in these situations. I just needed to retrace my steps carefully. I looked for any sign of my footprints, anything that could guide me back. That's when I saw them. Footprints, but not mine. They were fresh, deep. Someone else had been here. Recently, the size looked similar to mine, maybe a little bigger, and they led off the trail into the trees. My gut told me to ignore them, to stick to the path and get back to familiar ground, but my curiosity got the better of me. Maybe they led back to a main trail. Maybe someone else knew the way out. I followed them. The deeper I went, the worse I felt. The air was heavier, damp with a smell I couldn't place. Not quite rot, not quite earth, something in between. The footprints continued, but they became more erratic, like whoever made them had started moving faster. Running. Then they stopped. Just like that. In the middle of a small clearing, the prints simply ended. No sign of struggle, no broken branches, no drag marks. Just gone. That's when I heard it. A sound, far off but getting closer. A rustling, not like an animal moving, but something bigger, heavier. The crunch of leaves and snapping of twigs underfoot. I froze. The sound circled the clearing, slow and deliberate. I didn't breathe. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears. It was close, too close. I could feel it. I had to move. I had to get out of there. Slowly, carefully, I stepped backward, retracing my steps. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but I didn't. Not yet. Running blind through the forest would only get me more lost. I kept my pace steady, forcing my breathing to stay quiet, controlled. Then the sound stopped. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. I took one more step, and then it exploded. The branches behind me snapped violently, something crashing through the undergrowth. I ran. I didn't look. I just ran. My pack bounced against my back, my feet barely touching the ground as I bolted through the trees. I could hear it behind me, crashing, breaking, chasing. I hit the ground hard, my foot catching on a root. Pain shot through my knee, but I scrambled up, forcing myself forward. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move. My chest burned, my legs ached, but I kept pushing. The sound behind me didn't stop. Then light, through the trees just ahead. The sun breaking through the canopy. An opening. I ran harder, lungs screaming for air. The moment I broke through the trees, the sound behind me stopped. Just like that, gone. I stumbled forward into a gravel parking lot. My car was there, right where I had left it. I turned, expecting something to burst through the trees after me. Nothing, just the quiet forest. Peaceful, normal. I didn't wait. I threw my pack into the car, jumped in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced back one last time. There, at the edge of the trees, just barely visible in the shadows. A footprint, not mine. I had planned the hike for months. It was a solo trip, something I had been wanting to do for a while. Just me, the mountains, and the quiet. I picked a trail that was well known but not too crowded, deep in the backcountry. It was about 20 miles in and out, with a beautiful lake at the turnaround point. Perfect for a weekend trip. I got to the trailhead early on a Saturday morning. The air was crisp, the kind of fresh you only find in the mountains. I double-checked my pack, tent, sleeping bag, food, water, GPS, emergency beacon. Everything I needed. I locked my car, adjusted my straps, and started walking. The first few miles were easy. The trail wound through thick pines, the sun barely touching the forest floor. Birds chirped, and now and then, I heard the rustle of something moving in the underbrush, probably just squirrels. I kept a steady pace, stopping only to sip some water. The silence was peaceful, but there was always that little sliver of unease when you're alone in the woods. I ignored it. Around mile 6, the trail started getting steeper. The trees thinned, and I caught glimpses of the valley below. The wind picked up as I climbed higher. I was sweating, but the air was getting colder. I checked my map, confirming I was on the right path. Still another 4 miles to go before I reached the lake. Then, about a mile later, I saw something weird. A backpack. It was just lying there in the middle of the trail. It looked old, dirty, and torn in places. I walked up to it, nudging it with my boot. It had clearly been there a while. The zippers were open, and it was empty. No sign of its owner. I looked around. No footprints, no broken branches. Just the bag, abandoned. It didn't make sense. I stood there for a while, listening. The wind rustled the trees, but other than that, silence. I shook it off. Maybe someone left it behind. Maybe it fell from another hiker's pack. I moved on. A few miles later, I reached the lake. It was beautiful, crystal clear water, surrounded by jagged peaks. I found a flat spot near the shore and set up my tent. I ate a quick dinner and watched the sun dip behind the mountains. The temperature dropped fast, so I bundled up and crawled into my sleeping bag. I dozed off, listening to the water lapping against the shore. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something felt off. I wasn't sure what. I lay still, holding my breath. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not an animal, these were slow, deliberate. Someone was walking near my tent. My heart pounded. I reached for my knife, gripping it tight. The footsteps stopped. I stayed frozen, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing. Just the wind and the lake. After what felt like forever, I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out. Darkness. The stars reflected off the water, but the trees cast deep shadows. I didn't see anyone. I listened for a while longer, then forced myself to lie back down. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the wind shifted some rocks. But I barely slept after that. Morning came and I packed up quickly. Something about the night still didn't sit right with me. I wanted to get back to my car. I started the hike down, moving faster than before. Around mile 10, I noticed something else strange. More abandoned gear. A torn-up jacket snagged on a branch. A single hiking boot sitting in the dirt. It was all old, weathered, like it had been there for years. But why? Then I saw the scratch marks. Not animal scratches, these were deep, carved into a tree like someone had been dragging something sharp down the trunk. There were more on another tree further down. A chill ran through me. I didn't want to stop anymore. I just wanted out. I picked up my pace, nearly jogging. I wasn't tired anymore. Adrenaline kept me moving. At mile 15, I smelled something awful. Rot, like meat left in the sun. It was coming from off the trail, deeper in the woods. I didn't want to look, but I did. I wish I hadn't. About 20 yards in, I saw the remains of a campsite. A tent, collapsed and torn. Sleeping bag shredded. Scattered gear. And bones. Human bones. They were picked clean, sun-bleached. I turned and ran. I ran harder than I ever had in my life. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I didn't care about twisting an ankle. Didn't care about my pack slamming against my back. I needed to get out of there. The last few miles blurred together. I don't even remember them. I just remember bursting out of the woods, gasping for air, hands shaking as I unlocked my car. I peeled out of the lot, heart still hammering. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I reported what I found. I told the rangers everything. They took it seriously. Search teams went out, but I never found out what they discovered. No one ever called me for more information. No news reports. Nothing. I don't go hiking alone anymore. Some things you're just not supposed to find. I always loved hiking alone. It gave me time to clear my head, enjoy the silence, and test my endurance. That's why I picked a remote trail in the Pacific Northwest, one that wasn't on any major hiking sites. I wanted something untouched, something pure. I found an old logging road on a topographical map, leading deep into the mountains. The road connected to a narrow, barely visible trail that seemed to follow a ridgeline. It was perfect. I packed my gear, checked the forecast, cold but clear, and set off early in the morning, wanting to make good time before nightfall. The first few miles were easy. The air was crisp, the sky a deep blue, and the only sounds were my boots crunching on the ground and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I felt at peace. A few hours in, I noticed the trail getting less defined. The moss-covered rocks and fallen branches made it clear no one had been through here in a long time. That only made it better. But then, I found something strange. A single boot. It was old, cracked, and partially buried in the dirt. It didn't look like it had been there for decades, but it had definitely been sitting for a while. I didn't think much of it at first. People lose things. Maybe someone had taken a bad step, twisted their ankle, and left the boot behind. It was weird, but not enough to make me turn around. I pressed on. As I climbed higher, the air grew thinner and colder. The trees became sparser, revealing the vast wilderness beyond. That's when I noticed the first sign of real trouble. A second boot. Not the match to the first. A different one. A different size. And next to it, a torn scrap of fabric. A piece of a jacket, maybe. That was odd. Really odd. But still, I reasoned with myself. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe hunters came through here long ago and left things behind. Maybe it was nothing. I kept walking. Then I saw the claw marks. Deep, jagged gouges in the trees lining the trail. Not from a bear. I'd seen bear scratches before. These were different. Longer, deeper, almost deliberate. I ran my fingers over the grooves. The wood was rough but dry. Whatever had made these marks had done so a long time ago. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. I kept moving, faster now, my senses heightened. The forest felt different. The trees seemed closer, the air heavier. My footsteps felt too loud, like I was interrupting something. The silence pressed against me, and then I saw the bones, scattered along the trail, picked clean. Some small, rabbits maybe, but others larger. Too large. I stopped breathing for a second. It wasn't just the bones that scared me. It was how they were arranged, not scattered randomly by scavengers. They were placed, positioned. I swallowed hard. I was miles from my car, deep in the wilderness, alone. I had no cell service. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. I had to keep moving. I tried to stay calm, but my mind raced. Was someone living out here? Some survivalist? A hermit? But then why the bones? Why the scratches? I pushed forward, picking up the pace. I just needed to reach the ridgeline, find a clearer trail down, and get back to my car before dark. Then I heard it. Not an animal, not the wind. A sound low and rhythmic, almost like breathing. I froze. It was close. I turned my head slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just thick forest, shadows stretching as the sun sank lower. I took another step. The breathing stopped. That was worse. I wasn't alone. I kept walking, forcing myself not to run. Running would only make noise, only draw attention. I needed to stay quiet. But then, ahead on the trail, something was hanging from the branches. Clothing, shredded pieces of shirts, pants, jackets. Some looked old, sun-bleached and tattered. Others, newer. I didn't stop, couldn't stop. My heartbeat hammered in my ears, but I kept moving. Then I smelled it. Rot. A deep, stomach-turning stench. The kind that clings to the back of your throat. And I saw it. Not an animal carcass. Not a pile of bones. A shelter. A crude lean-to built from branches and covered in strips of cloth, animal hides, and something else. I didn't want to look closer. I didn't need to. I wasn't supposed to be here. Then I heard movement behind me. Fast. Close. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care about making noise anymore. I just ran. The trail blurred past me. My legs burning. My breath ragged. I didn't stop until I saw the old logging road again. I crashed through the underbrush, stumbling toward my car, gasping for air. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and fumbled for the keys with shaking hands. I started the engine and peeled out, gravel spraying as I sped down the mountain, not looking in the rearview mirror, not stopping until I was miles away. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't want to know. I never went back. I never will. I had been hiking alone for years, always preferring the solitude of the mountains over the chatter of a group. There was something about being alone out there that made everything feel more real, more raw. No distractions, no unnecessary noise, just me and the trail. This time, I had chosen a lesser-known trail deep in the Pacific Northwest. It was a long one, stretching nearly 20 miles through dense forests, steep ridges, and deep valleys. The kind of hike that pushed your endurance and kept you on edge. It wasn't an official trail, more of an old hunting path, barely marked on any maps. I had found it by scanning old forums where seasoned hikers shared hidden routes. I started in the morning, when the air was still cold, the sun barely peeking through the trees. The ground was damp from the night before, the smell of pine and wet earth filling my lungs. The first few miles were easy, just a steady incline with some switchbacks. Nothing I hadn't done before. As I moved deeper into the woods, the trail became rougher. The path, if you could even call it that, was just a thin strip of trampled dirt surrounded by thick underbrush. At times, I had to push branches aside or step over fallen logs. The further I went, the more I realized how isolated I was. No footprints, no sign of other hikers, just me. Around midday, I stopped for a quick lunch near a small stream. The water was crystal clear, moving fast over smooth stones. I refilled my bottle, took a few bites of an energy bar, and checked my map. I was making good time. If I kept up my pace, I'd be able to set up camp before dark. But something was bothering me. The The feeling had started a few miles back. A tightness in my stomach, an unease that I couldn't shake. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the kind of tension you get when you feel like you're being watched. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Being alone in the woods could do that, but I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few minutes, just in case. I kept moving. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing in on either side of me. The sun was starting to dip lower, the light filtering through the branches in streaks of gold and orange. It was beautiful, but it also meant I had to find a spot to camp soon. Then I saw it. First, I thought it was just another fallen tree, but as I got closer, I realized it was something else. A tent, an old one, sagging and covered in moss, barely visible in the undergrowth. I stopped, heart hammering. It wasn't normal to see something like that out here. This wasn't a popular trail. And the tent, it looked like it had been there for years. I took a step closer, hesitant. The fabric was torn in places, the color faded. There was no sign of anyone around. No footprints, no gear, just the tent, abandoned. I thought about checking inside, but something in my gut told me not to. Instead, I walked around it, scanning the area. That uneasy feeling was stronger now, like I wasn't supposed to be here. I forced myself to move on. I needed to find a spot to camp before dark. Another mile or so, and I found a clearing. A small, flat space surrounded by thick trees. It wasn't ideal, but it would do. I set up my tent quickly, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me tense. The rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional snap of a twig. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up to the sound of something moving outside my tent. It was slow, deliberate. Footsteps. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I lay completely still, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside. I could hear breathing, low, steady. I reached for my knife, my hand shaking. I thought about calling out, but something told me not to. Instead, I stayed silent, barely even breathing. Minutes passed. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound was gone. The footsteps faded into the distance. The forest was silent again. I didn't move. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping my knife, every muscle tense. As soon as the sun rose, I packed up and started hiking back. I didn't stop, didn't eat, didn't rest. I just moved, pushing myself harder than I ever had. The whole way, I felt like something was behind me, watching. By the time I made it back to my car, I was exhausted, shaking. I threw my pack in the back seat, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. I don't know what was out there that night. I don't want to know. I haven't been back to that trail since, and I never will. The sun was already low when I decided to take the shortcut. I'd hiked Black Ridge Trail a dozen times before, but never this late. The map showed a narrow path cutting through the dense woods, shaving off at least an hour from the usual route. I figured I'd be back at the car before dark. I was wrong. The moment I stepped off the main trail, the air changed. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The trees here grew close together, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The ground was uneven, covered in a thick layer of damp leaves that muffled my footsteps. I checked my phone, no signal. Not unusual for these woods, but it still made my stomach tighten. I kept walking, telling myself I was just being paranoid. The path was faint but still visible, marked by occasional broken branches and flattened undergrowth. After about 20 minutes, though, something felt off. The landmarks didn't match my memory. The big boulder with the mossy face should have been on my right, but it wasn't there. The stream I was supposed to cross was nowhere in sight. I stopped, wiping sweat from my forehead. The air was thick, humid, clinging to my skin. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun lazily before settling, but the direction didn't make sense. According to it, I was heading northeast, but I should have been going west. That's when I heard it. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. Not ahead of me, not behind me, but to my left, deep in the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Could have been an animal. A deer, maybe, but deer don't step that heavy. I waited, listening. Nothing, just the wind hissing through the leaves. I started walking again, faster this time. The path was disappearing, swallowed by undergrowth. My boots sank into the soft earth, each step a struggle. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor as the sun dipped lower. I checked my watch, 6:47 p.m. Dusk would come soon, then full dark. Another sound, this time closer. A slow, deliberate crunch of leaves. Not random, not an animal. Someone or something was moving parallel to me, just out of sight. My pulse hammered in my ears. I picked up my pace, nearly tripping over a root. The trees seemed to press in around me, their trunks like prison bars. I didn't want to run. Running meant panic, and panic meant mistakes. But every instinct screamed at me to get out. Then I saw it. A figure, just a glimpse between the trees, maybe 30 yards away. Tall, dressed in dark clothing, standing perfectly still. Watching me, I didn't wait to see more. I ran. Branches whipped at my arms and face as I crashed through the underbrush. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The forest blurred around me, a nightmare of shadows and grasping limbs. Then light, a break in the trees. I burst into a small clearing, my knees buckling as I stumbled forward. My hands hit dirt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I looked up, I saw it. A narrow dirt road, barely more than a trail, but unmistakably man-made. I didn't know where it led, but it was better than the woods. I followed it, my legs shaky but determined. The road curved, dipped, then finally opened onto a wider gravel path. In the distance, the glow of headlights cut through the twilight. A truck moving slow. I waved my arms, shouting hoarsely. The truck slowed, then stopped. The driver, an older man in a flannel shirt, rolled down his window. "You all right, son?" I could barely speak. "Lost," I managed. "Got turned around in the woods." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "Hop in. I'll take you to town." As the truck pulled away, I glanced back at the forest. The trees stood silent, indifferent, but for a second, just a second, I thought I saw movement near the treeline. A shadow slipping back into the dark. I didn't look again. The man didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. The hum of the engine, the warmth of the cab, it all felt unreal after what had just happened. By the time we reached the small roadside diner at the edge of town, my hands had stopped shaking. I thanked him, stepped out, and watched as the taillights disappeared down the road. I never went back to Black Ridge. Not after that. Some shortcuts aren't worth taking. I should have turned back when the trail started to fade. The morning had been perfect. Cool air, the kind that nips at your skin just enough to wake you up, and sunlight cutting through the trees in sharp, golden lines. My boots crunched over dry leaves, the sound steady, familiar. The map said this was an easy loop, 6 miles total, nothing crazy. Just a way to clear my head. But then the markers stopped. First, I thought I'd missed one. I backtracked, scanning the trees for the bright blue blazes painted on the trunks. Nothing. The path under my feet narrowed, the dirt thinning into scattered patches of moss and roots. The forest here was thicker, the trees leaning in close, their branches tangling overhead like fingers locking together. The light dimmed. I checked my phone, no signal. Not unusual out here. I had a compass, but without knowing exactly where I'd strayed, it wasn't much help. The smart thing would have been to turn around, retrace my steps until I found the trail again. But I didn't. I told myself it was fine. I'd just keep going straight. The loop had to reconnect somewhere. Then the ground changed. It sloped downward, soft and uneven, the soil giving way like something had hollowed it out beneath. My foot sank, and I stumbled, catching myself on a tree. The bark was damp, spongy under my fingers. When I pulled my hand back, it came away streaked with something dark. Not dirt, too thick. I wiped it on my pants and kept moving. The air got heavier, wetter, the kind of damp that clings to your skin. The trees here were different, older, twisted, their roots bulging from the ground like veins. No birds, no rustling, just the sound of my own breathing, too loud in the quiet. Then I saw the bones. Small at first, a deer maybe, sun-bleached and scattered, but then more, larger, a rib cage, still half buried in the dirt. A skull, hollow-eyed, wedged between two roots. My stomach tightened. This wasn't right. Animals died in the woods all the time, but not like this. Not piled together. I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A snap. Not from me. Not from any animal I knew. Something big. I didn't run. Running is loud. Running is desperate. I moved fast but careful, stepping where the ground looked solid, keeping my breathing quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs. The sound came again, closer. A shape moved between the trees. Not a bear, not anything I recognized. Just a shadow low to the ground, shifting in a way that wasn't right. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. Branches whipped at my arms, my face. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, pain shooting up my wrist as I caught myself. Behind me, the thing moved faster, not running, slithering, dragging. I scrambled up, lungs burning. The trees thinned ahead, light. The trail. I could see it. I burst into the clearing, skidding to a stop at the edge of a drop. A cliff, not tall but steep, the rocks below jagged. No way down. I turned. It was there, at the tree line, watching. Not an animal, not a person, something else, something wrong. I backed up, my heel hitting empty air. Then the ground gave way. I fell. Pain, white hot, tearing through my leg as I hit the rocks. I rolled, tumbling down the slope until the world finally stilled. I don't know how long I lay there. The sky was dark when I opened my eyes. My leg was broken, the bone jutting just above my ankle. Blood soaked my pant leg, warm and sticky, but I was alive, and the thing was gone. I dragged myself to a tree, using the trunk to pull myself up. Every movement sent fire through my leg, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. Took hours. Crawling, limping, biting back screams. But I found the trail, the real one. The blue blazes looked like heaven. They found me just before dawn. A search party. I'd been gone longer than I thought. At the hospital, they said I was lucky, that I'd gotten turned around, fallen, hallucinated from the pain. Maybe, but I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there. The sun was already low when I decided to take the shortcut. Stupid idea. The main trail was longer, winding through safe, open ridges, but I was tired. My legs ached, and the thought of cutting through the dense stretch of forest to reach the parking lot faster was too tempting. I'd done it before, just not this late. The trees swallowed me whole. The moment I stepped off the marked path, the air thickened. The usual sounds, birds, the rustle of squirrels, were gone. Only the wind moved, whispering through the pine needles like it was warning me. My boots sank into the damp earth, leaves crunching underfoot. The GPS on my phone had no signal, but I wasn't worried. I knew these woods. At least I thought I did. An hour in, the terrain changed. The ground sloped downward, steeper than I remembered, and the trees grew tighter together. Branches clawed at my arms, leaving thin red lines. My breath came faster. This wasn't right. I should have hit the creek by now, the one that led straight back to the trailhead. Instead, there was only more forest, darker and quieter. I stopped to check my compass. The needle spun lazily before settling. North was behind me. That couldn't be. I had been walking west. My stomach twisted. I turned, retracing my steps, but the landmarks I'd noted, the bent oak, the mossy boulder, were gone. Or maybe I'd never seen them. Panic slithered up my throat. The sky turned a deep bruise purple. Shadows stretched long and thin, merging into one solid darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam cut through the black, revealing nothing but more trees, more undergrowth. My pulse hammered in my ears. I walked faster, then jogged, my pack slamming against my back. Twigs snapped underfoot, loud as gunshots. Then I heard it, a sound, not an animal, not the wind. Something heavy, moving through the brush. Slow, deliberate. I froze. The noise stopped. My flashlight shook in my grip. I swung the beam toward the sound. Nothing, just trees. I forced myself to breathe. Probably a deer, or my imagination. I kept moving, but the feeling didn't leave, the sense of being watched. The air was colder now, my breath fogging in front of me. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. Then I saw it. A figure, just a glimpse between the trees. Tall, too tall, standing perfectly still. My blood turned to ice. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart jackhammered. I ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots snagged my feet. I didn't care. I just ran. The forest spat me out suddenly. One moment, trees. The next, open sky. I stumbled onto a dirt road. Not the one I'd parked on, but a road. A real one. My knees gave out. I collapsed, gasping, my hands shaking. Headlights. A truck rumbled into view, slowing as it approached. The window rolled down. A man's face, weathered, concerned. "You all right?" I couldn't speak, just nodded. He frowned, looking past me into the trees. "You shouldn't be out here, not this late." I knew he was right. I climbed into the truck, the warmth of the cab like a lifeline. As we drove away, I glanced back. The forest was just a dark smudge against the horizon. Normal, quiet, but I knew something had been in there with me, and it wasn't human.